Chapter 548. In a room of an exquisite small building in Qin's mansion, Qin Yu was lying on a bed covered with several layers of brocade quilts. A certain part of his body was wrapped with white cloth, and his face was extremely pale. He had just recovered from a serious illness and he was beaten 80 times. Although he did not lose his life, this time he might need to recuperate for a few days. I didn't expect. He shook his head and said in a weak voice, I didn't expect His Majesty to indulge him to such an extent that he could even take 2 little princesses out of the palace. It's not an injustice to lose this time. King Shu on the side had a deep understanding of this. Last time he lay in the palace for 2 months, while the other side was as free and unrestrained as ever outside the palace. Sometimes he even wondered who was the biological son of his father, himself or Li Yi. He had been like this since he was a child. Not to mention Emingzu, he even treated that damn Zhou Xian much better than he did. He felt that he had a fake father. These days for the first time he realized that the high position did not seem to be so easy to get. This kind of thought had never appeared before. King Shu shook his head and said, These days you'd better rest at home. This time there are many of you. If you were alone it would not be as simple as dozens of floggings. That matter, is that it? Qin Yu suddenly said without rhyme or reason. King Shu knew what he was referring to. He shook his head helplessly again and said, What else can I do? Intermittent hysteria, madness, I can only admit that I'm unlucky. Yes. Qin Yu sighed and said, I can only admit that I'm unlucky. They had been together since childhood, so they naturally knew each other's temperament. They looked at each other and had a tacit understanding. The position of crown prince? Li Yi said in surprise, Of course. This matter has to be decided by His Majesty. It's better for us foreign officials to stay out of it. It wasn't easy to bring the topic to the main point. Qin Xiang thought that his meaning had been expressed very clearly. However, Li Xianbua had been avoiding the topic and never responded to it directly. He didn't know how many times he had the impulse to serve tea and send off his guest. After saying so much, Qin Xiang's throat was a little dry. He picked up the teacup and took a sip. Li Yi stood up from his seat, cupped his hands and said, If that's the case, this junior will take his leave. Why? Is there something urgent in Uncle Li's family? Prime Minister Qin was stunned. He didn't know why Li Mu would do this. Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked, Hasn't Prime Minister Qin already served tea to see the guests off? The current him was no longer the newbie who had just arrived here. The ancient people liked to beat around the bush when they spoke and did things. Serving tea meant sending the guest off. He was not as blind as Zhou Xian. This old man is just thirsty. Prime Minister Qin didn't realize that his actions would cause a misunderstanding. He said, I won't beat around the bush. I know that you have a grudge against the King of Shu. I only have one question. If your Highness is willing to let go of the grudge, can County Uncle Li let bygones be bygones? The King of Shu will inherit the throne in the future. You should be clear about the pros and cons. He would never be so straightforward when he talked to people. However, if he continued to talk in the way just now, he was afraid that there would be no result even when it was dark. However, he didn't have the patience to wait any longer. In fact, just now Li Yi had roughly guessed why Prime Minister Qin called him here today. However, was he sure that the King of Shu was willing to let go of the grudge? If that guy had such a mind, things wouldn't have gotten to this point. If he really became the emperor, would there be a way for him and others to live? Since he took action in the palace that day, there had been no way out. Naturally, it was impossible for him to turn back. Either he lived or the King of Shu died. There was no second possibility. Li Yi sighed and pointed to his head. He said, Prime Minister Qin, you know that sometimes I can't control myself, especially when I see the King of Shu. I don't know when my hysteria will act up. If I hurt the King of Shu again, I'm afraid that His Majesty will see my head. The court officials won't agree either. It's not good for anyone. In fact, until now, Prime Minister Qin still didn't know whether the intermittent hysteria was real or not. After all, if there was no illness, a normal person wouldn't do something like beating a prince in the palace under the watchful eyes of the public. However, in this world, was there really such a magical illness? Or was the King of Shu and him born to oppose each other? The judgment of the Imperial Physician Bureau could not be false. After all, Li Yi had just arrived in the capital. It was impossible for him to control the Imperial Physician Bureau so quickly and make an imperial physician say something that deceived the emperor. If this was true, then he was too powerful. Prime Minister Qin frowned and asked, "This hysteria, how did you get it?" Li Yi sighed faintly. He said, "It's a long story. Everything starts from that winter 10 years ago. The king of Shu walked out of Qin Yu's courtyard, looked back and then turned to leave. The reason why Qin Yu fell into this situation was caused by Li Yi. Even his current predicament couldn't escape from him. However, now that he was getting stronger, he was valued by the emperor father, the eldest princess Li Xian, and the family of generals. As long as he didn't ascend the throne, he couldn't do anything to him. Although he didn't want to admit it, it was a fact. He could influence some things in the court, but for him who wasn't in the court at all, it was not worth mentioning. As for small fights in private, it wouldn't hurt the foundation and there was a high possibility that it would be exposed. Naturally, he wouldn't do it easily. Coincidentally, he found out that the girl had a close relationship with him. If something happened to her, Li Yi would naturally not be happy, but he would be happy. However, he was depressed to find out that he could not even complete such a small task, which made him feel even more depressed. As he was thinking about these things, he suddenly felt a pain in his chest when he turned a corner in a long corridor. He looked down and saw the maid who accidentally bumped into him. He slapped her and said coldly, "Lowly maid, don't you have eyes?" If this was in the king of Shu's mansion, such a servant would have been dragged out and beaten. However, this was the Qin's mansion, so he naturally had to restrain himself. The maid was wearing a thin veil on her face. After the slap, the veil fell off, revealing a scar on her face. Seeing this, the king of Shu felt even more disgusted. Sorry. The maid covered her face and kept apologizing. In a pavilion not far away, the Qin family's fifth master shook his head in disappointment. What a coincidence! There's no fun to watch now. Just as he finished speaking, he saw a young figure walk out of the hall. After a moment of shock, a look of excitement appeared on his face. He grabbed a handful of melon seeds peeled by a maid and put them in his mouth, staring in a certain direction. "Get lost." The king of Shu scolded the maid coldly and walked past her. Suddenly, he felt something and turned his head to look, meeting with another pair of eyes. This was a big surprise. Looking at that gaze, the king of Shu immediately thought of some unhappy things. He couldn't help but take a few steps back, but he didn't notice the steps behind him. He stepped on air and the sharp pain from his ankle made his expression a little hideous. At the same time, he lost his balance and fell into the lotus pond at the side. Save me. In just a few breaths of time, the Qin manor was filled with the sounds of chickens flying and dogs jumping. Countless panicked figures began to madly rush towards the pool. Li Yi and Lu Mei looked at each other with innocent expressions on their faces. This time they really couldn't blame him. He was also very surprised to meet the king of Shu here. He just glanced at him and then the king of Shu jumped into the pond. Could this be the legendary king's aura? Not far away, the Qin family's fifth master widened his eyes, and melon seeds sprayed out from his nose. He didn't expect the king of Shu to be so afraid of County Uncle Li that he jumped into the pond in fear from a distance of several feet. It was said that the king of Shu was a good-for-nothing. Today he saw that the rumors were true. Chapter 549. The water in the lotus pond was not deep, and the king of Shu was quickly fished out by the servants of Qin's mansion. When he fell down, he was not injured, but his whole body was wet. But before he fell, he sprained his ankle. It seemed to be quite serious and he could not even stand up. He was immediately carried away by two servants, and another person hurried out of the mansion to find a doctor. After the king of Shu disappeared, the expressions of some servants in Qin's mansion became a little strange. Many people had seen the scene just now. A dignified prince was actually scared to this extent by a county uncle. It was really a bit too embarrassing. Xianxia walked out of the hall. When he looked back from the lotus pond, the way he looked at Li Yi was completely different from before. In the end, he did not succeed in roping him in. No matter what reason the other party found, he was still standing on the opposite side of the king of Shu. Moreover, the scene he saw just now proved that there was probably no way to turn back the situation. Li Yi turned back, cupped his hands to Xianxia and said, "I will leave first, the soup is still boiling at home." Xianxia nodded slightly and said to the servant girl beside him, "Show the way for County Uncle Li." "No need, remember the way." Li Yi waved his hand, turned around and left. Looking at his back, Xianxia could not hide the pity on his face. The servant girl with a scar on her face also looked up, bit her lips and slowly left. Zhou Xian left Hongdong County and came to the street. I have not spoken, but my heart is miserable. Gentlemen, listen to me. Who will go to Nanjing and pass the letter to my San Lang? Fifth Lord, where are you going? Seeing the Fifth Lord humming a tune with his hands behind his back, Wu Er asked in confusion. The Fifth Lord sighed and said, It's not enough, not enough, let's go out to watch the opera. I heard from Rui that you went to Prime Minister Qin's mansion today? While eating, Rui looked up at Li Yi and asked. Oh yes. Li Yi picked up a mouthful of food and said casually, We just chatted casually and didn't even drink tea. The Qin family is so stingy. What business does Prime Minister Qin have with you? Although Li Yi rarely mentioned anything about the imperial court or outside matters, she was actually very clear about her family's position in the imperial court, friends and foes, as well as some changes in the situation. Because some of the departments in the brothel were in charge of such things. It's nothing much. We just casually chatted for a bit. He said that I'm going to assist the king of Shu, but he's just a pile of mud that can't be supported. What's there to support? Li Yi put down his chopsticks and peeled a prawn for Xiaohuan. Rui had no problem peeling prawns as they could do it with just 2 chopsticks. Only Xiaohuan could not learn it no matter how hard she tried and always made a mess. Xiaohuan and he both liked to eat prawns, but the prawns had been kept in the ice house for a long time and were not very fresh. Today's prawns were sent by the Tsundra Lolita from the palace. He heard that they were the newly arrived tribute prawns. This was the advantage of being an emperor. He could eat whatever he wanted. If there was nothing in Jingdo, he could have other places pay tribute to him. Ever since the cost of making ice had been greatly reduced, fruits shipped from distant places had become cheap. Thank you, Prime Minister. Xiaohuan said sweetly and focused on eating. Prime Minister Qin and the King of Shu were all bad people. Prime Minister Qin would beat up bad people. She only wanted to eat prawns. Then did anything happen? Rui asked again. No. Li Yi shook his head and said, They are all scholars. What can happen? Even if they really want to do something, they can't be so brazen. Besides, Fong and the others are following them, so there's no need to worry. After saying that, he looked at Rui and asked, How's the hero competition going? It should be coming soon, right? Rui shook her head and said, I'm afraid it will be delayed for a few more days. Recently there have been more and more experts coming to Jingdo. The heaven list changes every day. Even if it is held now, I'm afraid many people will not agree. Originally they did not consider the problem of the number of people. If any Tom, Dick or Harry came to fight for the position of the chief of Wulin, how long would the competition last? However, if the qualification was limited to the experts on the heaven list, the hero list would be in an uproar. Those who wanted to keep a low profile would probably not be able to do it. Whether they could be the chief or not, they still had to fight for the qualification. This directly led to a great increase in the number of competitions that needed to be held every day. Of course, there were many experts and it was much more exciting than before. The daily profits also doubled. If they were allowed to compete for another 2 months, not only would they be able to recoup their losses, but they would also make a lot of money. 2 months could not be delayed. According to the current situation, all the preparation work should be finished in half a month at most. The only thing left was to send Mississippi Lu to the top. After talking with Rui and the others about the heroes meeting, Li Yi suddenly thought of something and said, I saw Lu Mei at the Qin Manor today. Xiaohuan suddenly raised her head and asked, Son-in-law, which Lu Mei is it? The one who always quarreled with you in Willow Leaf Village. The maid was stunned for a moment, then she pouted and said, It's her. Ever since she was young she had always been bullied by Lu Mei. After what had happened, it was only natural that she did not have a good impression of her. Why is she in Qin Manor? Where are third uncle and third aunt? Rui asked curiously. Mississippi Lu also looked over. Third uncle and third aunt. Li Yi paused. He thought about it and told them the truth. Xiaohuan was stunned and the chopsticks in her hand fell to the ground. The expressions on Rui and Rui's faces froze. After a long time Rui sighed and said, Third uncle is actually very honest. When they went overboard he stood up for us. Third aunt. She has always been very powerful but... Rui shook her head. Even though there was some hatred in the past, Death was like a lamp going out. In the end there was still some relationship. She thought of some things when she was young and felt a little depressed. Mississippi Lou put down her chopsticks and walked out of the door. If it was somewhere else I could help. But it's Qin Manor. If I show something different it will hurt her. Xiao Huan was not in a good mood and so was Rui. Li Yi said, but it's not impossible to ask her to leave Qin Manor. But I think she might not agree. It was not suitable for him to ask for a maidservant from Qin Manor. Of course the other party would not give it to him. But whether it was the Princess Royal, Atsundra Lolita, or directly asking the old emperor for a decree, although the process was a little troublesome it was doable. After a short contact, Li Yi could feel some of her thoughts. She actually had some self-esteem, or else she would have asked for it herself. He thought that he knew he could not face Rui and the others so he could not force himself to do something. After a while Li Yi walked out of the room. He decided to put the matter of Lu Mei aside for the time being. Not long after Rui also walked out of the room. He was a little annoyed. Two maidservants were cleaning the courtyard while talking about something with great interest. I went out to help buy things today and heard something interesting on the street. What? What? I heard that yesterday at Prime Minister Qin's manor, the King of Shu was so scared that he sprained his ankle and fell into the water. It's so funny. I heard that the person just looked at him and the King of Shu was scared. I didn't expect him to be so timid, even more timid than Shao Qing. The whole capital is laughing. I can't take it anymore. I'm dying of laughter. Who else can scare the king? Did he bump into a ghost? I just heard a few words and then followed him. I don't know what happened next. Qin Manor, the King of Shu? Standing in the corridor, Rui was stunned. She looked in a certain direction and saw that Li Yi had just disappeared. Didn't you say that nothing happened? In the King of Shu's manor, the King of Shu was furious when he heard the servant's report. He flipped the table on the spot. Who is it? Who is it? Tell Qin Yu and I will find out. I will kill him. In a courtyard of the Qin Manor, a light and cheerful tune could be heard. Brother Lu's words are too biased. Chapter 550. Li Yi found that the maidservants in the residence were a little strange these days. They often stole glances at him when he wasn't paying attention. When he noticed that they were also looking at him they would all look away. This was something that had never happened before. When he washed his face in the morning he looked at his reflection in the water a few more times. Recently he hadn't obviously become more handsome. There was no reason for him to suddenly become so charming. What are you looking at? When he sat in the courtyard and flipped through the old book that second granduncle gave him, he saw two maidservants hiding in the corner looking at him. They were whispering and pointing at him. He finally couldn't help but walk over and ask. No, nothing. The two maidservants lowered their heads and wiped the pillars, not daring to look at him. Li Yi was a little puzzled and ignored them. Yesterday, second granduncle told him that he had neglected his martial arts practice. He threw him a booklet without a cover and the pages had already turned yellow, and told him to read it when he had nothing to do. Fong wasn't so lucky. He was whipped by the two guards. If he persisted for half an hour without being whipped he would have to start all over again. Lord Zhu doesn't look that scary. Yes, are the rumors false? Are they not talking about our Lord Zhu? I've asked them twice. They are talking about Lord Zhu but it really doesn't look like it. The two maidservants were full of doubts. Their Lord Zhu didn't look like the kind of person who would scare people into jumping into the lake with just a glance, not to mention that he was a prince. If it was the second miss it was possible. But if it was the handsome and amiable Lord Zhu, they really couldn't imagine the scene at that time. But in the past 2 days the news had spread throughout the capital. Lord Zhu had taken a look at the King of Shu in Prime Minister Qin's residence, and the King of Shu had jumped into the lake. It was said that he had even sprained his ankle. To the maids of the Li residence, this was truly unimaginable. Lord Zhu had always been kind to them. They had heard that the King of Shu had been beaten up by him before, and it seemed that he had beaten him up quite badly. Naturally, this was something that they could not imagine. But to just take a look at him, how could that be? Li Yi glanced at the two maidservants in the corner and said, "You've already been cleaning that pillar for an hour. If you continue to slack off I'll deduct your pay." The two maids immediately ran away. Lord Zhu's deduction of money was just a passing remark, but they didn't dare to discuss it anymore. The erotic book in his hand gave him a headache. Based on his level, he might not be able to handle it. When he saw Rui walking in from outside, Li Yi hurriedly waved at her. Wife, come here for a moment. In the next few days, Li Yi spent part of his time studying the erotic book. Rui seemed to value it very much. Whenever she had the time, she would give him pointers. Most of the time he would take Xiao Huan out for a stroll, to the brothel to watch shows and to patrol the shops. There was nothing much to do in the palace, and the days were as leisurely as ever. Sometimes he would also meet Wan Ruoqing. She was always very busy. In the beginning, Li Yi also felt that this was not the way to go on. There were too few people with the ability to manage. When there were more and more shops, there would be more and more things to do. It was far from enough to rely on just one or a few people. Wan Ruoqing nodded and said, I'm already consciously cultivating them. But this is not a matter of a day or two. I can still take care of things here for the time being. He was always so restless. Li Yi said a few times, but it was obviously not effective. Fortunately, Xiao Zhu was by her side, so she would not be as tired as before. Li Yi changed the topic. He pointed to a shed at the entrance of the brothel and asked, What is this used for? When he came here just now, he noticed that there was this thing. There were a few beggars waiting outside, and there was actually a queue. This is the porridge shed that was set up here 2 days ago. These beggars have nothing to do on weekdays, so they let them clean the inside after closing the brothel at night. Usually it takes a lot of effort to clean, but there are quite a lot of them, so they can save a lot of time. Wan Ruoqing explained, It doesn't cost much to give porridge twice a day, and they are also willing to do it. It's almost mealtime. Those who have worked here can get a bowl of porridge and 2 steamed buns with their tickets. The brothel was a crowded place, and a lot of garbage was produced every day. It was really troublesome to clean, especially after all kinds of melon seeds became popular in the capital these days. The cleaning work became more and more troublesome. This was a good idea. Li Yi felt that this method was unlikely to be Wan Ruoqing's idea. Make the best use of people and not waste any. This was old Sun's style of doing things. If it was free porridge, he was afraid that it would become a habit. This was also good. In fact, the cost would actually be reduced. Not long after, someone carried a big pot of porridge out from inside. Li Yi took a look, and it was not too thin. The beggars in the queue all had tickets in their hands. One ticket was a bowl of porridge, a salted vegetable, and 2 steamed buns. For these beggars who didn't know the next meal, the food was already very good. Not far away, there were beggars looking at them enviously. Seeing that there was still a lot left after the beggars received their food, the girl in charge of giving out porridge waved her hand and said, There is still a little left today. If you want to eat, come over. This time it's free for you. If you want to eat every day, go to the other brothels in the capital and ask again. See the one with the willow leaf sign at the door? Ask them if they are still short of people. When the beggars heard this, they immediately swarmed over, loudly saying, Great benefactor, living bodhisattva, and so on. The girl hurriedly said, Line up, line up, line up, otherwise we won't give it. In the distant corner of the street, a beggar was about to walk over, but he was stopped by a person. The beggar turned his head and said with some impatience, I don't care if the Empress of Heaven you speak of is real or not. She can't give me porridge to eat. I'm telling you, don't stop me anymore. In a bit there will be no porridge left. What is a bowl of porridge? The young man next to the beggar looked at him with bright eyes and said, 2 months ago I was the same as you. I didn't believe in the Empress of Heaven, but if it weren't for the Empress I would have starved to death. How could I have lived until now? The beggar looked at him again. Although his clothes were not luxurious, they were 100 times better than the beggars here. He suspiciously asked, The Empress of Heaven, is it real? If you believe in her, you will really have porridge to eat? Humph, the Empress of Heaven has already appeared twice. Everyone in the capital knows of her. You can go ask. He took out a scroll from his chest and carefully opened it. His face was filled with respect and fanaticism as he said, This is the Empress of Heaven. Wait a moment. The beggar looked at the scroll and hesitantly said, Wait a moment, I'll go get a bowl of porridge, there really won't be any left. There are many beggars in the capital city. In the past 2 days many people have come to ask. I've told them to go to other brothels. We really do lack people. As Wan Ruoqing and Li Yi were talking about these things, they saw a beggar walk over from a distance. She picked up the spoon and waited for the beggar to place the bowl on the table in front of her. The young girl who had just given out porridge had a stomachache and went to the bathroom. She happened to see this, so she took her place. The beggar placed the bowl and ticket on the table. He looked up and wanted to give him a bit more, but his mouth opened halfway and his eyes nearly popped out. Heaven, heaven, heaven. Empress. His voice trembled and his mind went blank. In that instant, a thought appeared in his mind. So those who believe in the Empress of Heaven can really have porridge to drink. What? Empress, did you mistake me for someone else? Wan Ruoqing shook her head with some doubt. Seeing that the young girl had already come over, she handed over the spoon in her hand and turned around to enter the brothel with Li Yi. The young girl rubbed her stomach and gave the beggar some porridge. She routinely said, "Tonight is the same time as before. Wait here and someone will bring you in." Hey, what's wrong? The beggar regained his composure and looked at the young girl. He rubbed his eyes and looked back at her with a puzzled expression. But he quickly reacted. He picked up the bowl of porridge and forgot to even take the steamed bun. He turned around and ran across the street. In a corner of the street, the youth carefully put away the scroll in his sleeve. At this moment the beggar ran over and grabbed his arm. With a trembling voice he said, I believe in the Empress of Heaven." As the youth was wondering why the beggar would have such a change, the beggar excitedly said, "I just saw the Empress of Heaven." The youth's body shook and a fanatical look appeared on his face. He grabbed the beggar's arm and asked, Where is the Empress of Heaven?" Chapter 551. Slow down. Everyone has one. The young girl waved her spoon. From time to time beggars would gather around her. She was alone, so she seemed a bit flustered. No, next time I have to get them to help me. Thinking this, she continued to wave her hand. After you finish eating, remember to go to the other brothels. Next time you have to use a ticket to get food. On the street, a beggar scratched his head in confusion. He said to himself, "That's not right. I just saw it. Did I see it wrong? Can't be wrong, it can't be wrong." The young man beside him shook his head. His eyes were full of light. It must be the Empress. Only the Empress would have such a kind heart. Then can I join the holy religion? The beggar looked at him and nervously asked. "Come with me," the young man said in a low voice. He glanced at the brothel again and committed it to memory. The last time he saw the goddess appear with his own eyes, it was also near here. The two of them turned around and their figures quickly disappeared into the vast crowd. Not long after, in a remote courtyard in the capital, the purple-clothed man raised an eyebrow. He asked, "The Empress appeared again. Did you see it with your own eyes?" The young man shook his head. "Although I didn't see it with my own eyes, the words of the new believer shouldn't be false. The last time I saw the Empress, it was near here." The purple-clothed man's eyes flashed. After a while he said, "All right, I understand. Although the Empress is an immortal, she cares for the believers. She will reincarnate into the human world and spread her grace. What you saw was the reincarnation of the Empress after she abandoned her divine power. Remember not to disturb her." "I understand." The young man respectfully cupped his hands and left. His expression was sincere. Whether it was the Empress or the reincarnation of the Empress, they were both existences that gave him a second life. To him there was no difference. After the young man left, the purple-clothed man walked to a door and gently knocked. "Come in." A light voice came from inside the room. The purple-clothed man pushed open the door and entered. Before he could speak, the middle-aged Daoist nun sitting cross-legged on the bed said, "You did very well. Since the believers of the capital believe in that Empress, then she must be the Empress. But how should we explain it to the believers in other places?" The man in purple asked tentatively. The middle-aged Daoist nun lightly said, "Since the heavenly Empress can have one incarnation, then why can't she have two? One to bring good fortune to all living beings and the other to punish. Why not?" The purple-robed man was stunned for a moment, then immediately said respectfully, "The Empress is wise. The woman in the portrait should be real. Spread the word that the Empress has abandoned her divine power, sealed her memories, and incarnated into the mortal world to experience the suffering of the mortal world. Only then can she benefit more believers. Tell them not to disturb her." After a pause, the middle-aged Taoist nun spoke again. "Also, You should personally investigate who that woman is. This subordinate will do as you bid. The purple-clothed man immediately nodded. Although the events of that day were outside of their plans after the Empress' reasonable arrangements, they actually had endless benefits. However, they still needed to be careful when dealing with that woman. If there was the slightest mistake, then all of their efforts in the capital would be for nothing. There's one more thing. The purple-clothed man thought for a moment, then said, the government seems to have discovered something. Recently, the intensity of the investigation on these matters has increased. This subordinate is worried that if this continues, I'm afraid that there will be some oversight. Then have them stop all actions and return to their normal lives. The middle-aged Taoist nun nodded and asked, how is the Assembly of Heroes going? The purple-clothed man said, this time's Assembly of Heroes has stirred up the entire martial world. The competition on the Heaven Proclamation is fierce and it has been delayed by a month. At the latest it will be held in half a month. Those secluded sects have also sent their true experts. However, the number one on the Heaven Proclamation is still that woman called Lu Rui. When speaking of those secluded sects, the middle-aged Taoist nun's expression did not change. However, when the purple-clothed man mentioned that name, her brows involuntarily twitched. Lu Rui, the young woman she had met in Qingyan Prefecture, was a grandmaster expert like her. She was also the biggest obstacle to her taking the position of alliance leader. It went without saying how useful the position of the leader of the Wulian Alliance was to the Holy Church. Otherwise, she wouldn't have started making arrangements so early. Especially after seeing the power of the Imperial Palace, she clearly realized that the Holy Church's current power was far from enough. The position of alliance leader could not be lost. Lu Rui. She closed her eyes and softly said this name. In the past 2 days, the headlines of the entertainment section of the Capital Daily were undoubtedly about a young royal family who lost his footing and got drenched by a murderous stare. A prince was as timid as a mouse. Was he the king of Shu or the Rat King? As for County Uncle Li, he was naturally covered with some legendary colors. There was a rumor in the capital that County Uncle Li got sick because of the fear of the king of Shu. Later, in the Imperial Palace, he seriously injured the king of Shu in front of all the officials, which undoubtedly gave the rumor-mongers a hard slap in the face. As time went by, this matter was almost forgotten by the people in the capital. However, the incident of the king of Shu jumping into the lake made people dig up the past. In contrast, it was full of irony. Of course, the influence of this incident was far more than that. As the first successor to the throne, the title of King of Shu could be said to be a topic of conversation. His every move was watched by the officials and the people. However, this successor always did some extremely shameful things, which made the people in the capital start to doubt whether their fate would be handed over to such a thing in the near future. Naturally, the officials also had the same concerns. Many people were not very satisfied with the King of Shu. After this incident, they naturally opposed the King of Shu even more. As for those who were still waiting to see which side to take, the balance in their hearts gradually began to tilt. As for those who were originally partial to the King of Shu but were not die-hard fans of the King of Shu, they even began to doubt their lives. Was this a damn fake prince? Could the King of Shu really make it? There were also movements from the other princes. If the King of Shu really couldn't make it, they would have to replace him in advance. No wonder His Majesty didn't express his opinion when Prime Minister Qin and others strongly recommended the King of Shu as the crown prince. When it came to judging people who could be more brilliant than His Majesty. Of course, these things were not in the hands of Li Yi for the time being. He was in the Imperial Palace, giving special treatment to Monarch Jin. Sir, I still don't think I can make it. Monarch Jin's chubby face was much thinner than before. He looked at Li Yi with a troubled expression. Why, you don't want to be the Dean of the College of Mathematics? Li Yi looked at him and asked. Not anymore. Li Han shook his head and said. Li Yi thought for a moment and looked at him and asked, do you know where Jinzhou is? Yes, my fief is in Jinzhou. Li Han nodded. Li Yi asked again, then do you know what Jinzhou is like? Li Han was stunned for a moment, then he shook his head. Jinzhou is very far from the capital. If you take a carriage, you won't be able to get there in 10 days or half a month. There are no sugar-coated haws, no beggar's chicken, no ice in summer and no fresh vegetables in winter. You won't be able to see your father and mother even once a year. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Now tell me, in a few years, do you want to go to Jinzhou, that remote place where birds don't even shit, to be a prince, or do you want to be the dean of the College of Mathematics and live freely in the capital? Li Han was stunned for a moment, then he suddenly swallowed his saliva. He looked at Li Yi and said with a firm gaze, "Sir, give me the book." When he walked out of the museum, Li Yi couldn't help but sigh. These children nowadays were really getting harder and harder to deceive. It was hard to persuade them. It would be better if they were simpler and simpler. Whatever the teacher said, he wouldn't have to waste so much time talking to them. He went to see Yongning and played chess with the Tsundere Lolita for a while. Finally, he used the super invincible celestial dog that could swallow the whole universe. Only then did he leave with satisfaction. He didn't go to Princess Royal Highness to ask her how she was doing as the chairman of the Women's Federation, how many die-hard female fans she had, how many officials and dignitaries she had won over. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but when he was talking with the old emperor about the College of Mathematics, Li Yi found that the emperor looked at him a little strange, as if he always had an impulse to kick someone in the next second. The imperial palace wasn't a place to stay for long, so it was better to leave as soon as possible. But thinking about it, it was normal. His son had become the laughing stock of the capital, and the title of King of Rats was even more resounding than King of Shu. This time he was afraid that he would lose a lot of fans in the court. Prime Minister Qin and others had worked hard for so long, but because of this guy's jump, not to mention going back to square one night, it was bound to go back 2 years. Thinking about it, Prime Minister Qin and others should doubt their lives a little more in the past few days. Last, the old man was so old. He often worried so much it would damage his lifespan. He was really worried about the old man. No wonder the old emperor wanted to kick him. If it was him, he would also kick him. Kicking people was a light punishment, and the culprit should be hung up and beaten. The person who spread rumors everywhere was simply a psycho. Was he so terrible that he could kill people with his eyes? If he really had this skill, could King of Shu live to this day? Forget it, it was better to come to the palace less these days. Even if he came, he would not see the old emperor who was in his 40s. Maybe he had reached his menopause, so he could not afford to provoke him. Today he helped Prince Jin to strengthen his faith. He believed that in the beggar's chicken, under the attraction of knowledge, he would work harder to study mathematics and strive to be a good successor to the dean of the College of Mathematics. What did he do just now? Emperor Jing asked casually while reading the memorials. Changde walked in from outside the hall and said, "Your Majesty, County Uncle Li taught Prince Jin about mathematics for a while in the Bowen Hall, and played with the 2 little princesses for an hour. He just left the palace." Emperor Jing put down the memorial and rubbed his eyebrows. When it came to the 2 little princesses, he had a headache. Changde smiled and said, "Your Majesty, don't blame me for being talkative. Princess Xianxing's words carry no harm. County Uncle Li always knows how to behave himself in these things." Behave himself? Emperor Jing picked up another memorial and said, "He killed County Uncle Li with his eyes and made King of Shu jump into the lake with his eyes. He has lost the face of the royal family. What does he know about propriety?" Changde smiled and said no more. Although His Majesty said so, in fact, in recent days he had been doing things in the style of that boy. King of Shu could not represent the face of the royal family, and, seeing that His Majesty no longer said anything, he slowly retreated out of the hall. There were no clouds in the autumn sky, and the wrinkles on his face stretched out. After all, the world still belongs to these young people. "Qin, what can I do for you?" Xiao Cui opened the courtyard door a crack and poked her head out. She looked at the young man standing outside and asked, "Is your mistress at home?" The young man waved his folding fan and asked with a smile. Xiao Cui frowned when she smelled the strong smell of alcohol. She grew up in a brothel and hated the smell of alcohol the most. Hearing that, she said, "Qin, if you have anything to say, just tell me. I will tell my mistress." "What? A guest is here and you won't let him in?" The smile on Chen's face disappeared, and several servants behind him also stepped forward. Although Xiao Cui was afraid, she still said boldly, "Men and women should not touch each other. There are only me and my mistress in the courtyard. In order to avoid gossip, Qin should say it here." "You bitch." An angry expression appeared on Chen's face. Just as he said this, the courtyard door opened and Xing Zima walked out. She said lightly, "Qin, what do you want? Say it." The young man in front of her who reeked of alcohol was Qin, who had been pestering her a lot these days. At first he pretended to be polite and well-mannered, but after running into a wall a few times he gradually returned to his playboy nature. She had seen many people like this before. Seeing Zimo come out, Chen immediately smiled and said, "Zimo, you're out. Let's talk inside, let's talk inside. Let's talk here." Zimo pulled Xiao Chui back half a step. Her voice seemed to be 1,000 miles away. A trace of anger flashed across Chen's face, but the next moment he smiled again and said, "Zimo, you know my feelings for you. I promise as long as you agree to me, you will enjoy endless wealth in the future. If that's the case, then there's no need to talk about it anymore." Zimo waved her hand. She had heard this kind of talk so much that her ears were about to get calluses. She looked at him and said, "Chen's status is noble. I really don't deserve him. It's better for Chen not to mention this matter in the future." After all, Chen had drunk today. After hearing this, no matter how self-restrained he was, he couldn't help it. She was just a prostitute, yet she made him spend so much effort. He angrily said, "It's your fortune that I like you. Who do you think you are? So what if you're the goddess of Luo Shui? Do you really think you're the daughter of a noble family? Let me tell you, I'm going to have you today." After saying that, he reached out to grab Zimo's arm. Xiao Chui's expression changed. She pushed Chen away and hurriedly said, "Miss, quickly go inside." Behind Chen, 2 attendants quickly stepped forward and blocked the courtyard door. Zimo and Xiao Chui's expressions both changed. Zimo's expression turned cold and said, "Trespassing? We can report this to the authorities." Chen had already stabilized his figure at this time and laughed. "Trespassing is nothing. Today I'm going to rob a woman." Then he reached out again and touched Zimo's face. Chapter 552. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. The young Chen's wrist was grabbed by someone. He raised his arm and twisted his body into a strange shape. He was in so much pain that his facial features were twisted together. "Let go of my young master." Several servants shouted and quickly ran over, wanting to stop the strange woman who suddenly appeared. "Get lost." However, after the shout, they only felt their vision blur. A huge force came from their chest and abdomen. Their bodies flew backward and fell heavily to the ground. "What did you just say?" Yang Liuqing used more strength in her hand and looked at the young man coldly. "No, nothing." The sudden increase in pain made Chen sober. He quickly said, "It hurts, it hurts. Let go of me. Get lost. Don't let me see you again." Yang Liuqing said coldly. Chen's body also flew out. This fall was even worse. His bones were about to fall apart. He got up from the ground and took 2 steps back. He pointed at them fiercely and said, "Just you wait." This time he didn't dare to continue saying harsh words. He turned around and left with a few servants. After all, this woman didn't look easy to deal with. It seemed that there were accomplices coming from the side. If they stayed, they would probably suffer even more. Although what happened just now was short, many people saw it. They surrounded and pointed at young Master Chen's back as he left. Their eyes were filled with disdain. A foppish young master flirting with a good girl. This was a scene that happened every day in the capital. "Miss Yang, why are you here?" Zimo looked at Yang Liuqing with some confusion. The two of them knew each other in Qingyan Prefecture, but their friendship wasn't deep. At this moment she was a little curious. Why would she appear here at such a critical moment? Moreover, it seemed like she had been here all along. Yang Liuqing waved at the figures that were approaching them. She then looked back at them and asked, "Are you guys okay?" Zimo shook her head. Looking at the figures retreating, she seemed to have understood something. She didn't ask any more. She looked at her and said, "Miss Yang, please come in and have a seat." Yang Liuqing shook her head and said, "I won't go in. It hasn't been peaceful these days. If you encounter anything wrong, just shout from inside. Someone outside can hear you." After saying that, she smiled and turned to leave. In the past few months, she had been working hard to improve her ranking on the heaven list. However, after entering the top 30, it was extremely difficult for her to win. She needed to accumulate enough strength. She had fought countless people and her experience was already very different from before. There was no point in participating in more battles. It just so happened that she had a mission, so she simply came here. She didn't expect to encounter such a thing on the first day. It was just that she was curious about Miss Zheng. It had already been so long, so she should have been welcomed into the house by senior uncle long ago. Why was she still thinking of this? She stopped thinking about it. This matter seemed a little complicated and it wasn't something she could participate in. Miss they. Xiao Tui watched them leave and scratched her head in confusion. Zheng Zima waved her hand and said, "It's fine. Let's go in." At this moment she could also guess that Li Yi must have sent more people here. However, she did not expect that young Duke Qin's revenge would not come, but this young Master Qin. However, in this way she was indeed a lot more relieved. As for that Qin, she might have been a little worried before. However, she had seen the king, the duke and all the top foppish young masters in the capital. The son of the Minister of Rights didn't seem to be that scary. "Bitch, you refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit." On a street somewhere in the capital, the young man with the surname Chen rubbed his chest. His expression was still a little painful as he said coldly, "Young master, are you okay?" A servant saw this and hurried forward to help him pat the dust off his body. "I'm fine." The young man stood where he was and waited for the servant to pat the dust off his clothes. Then he said gloomily, "She's just a prostitute. Why is she pretending to be a good person? Since that's the case, don't blame me for being impolite." "Then young master, where are we going now?" "To the spring pavilion." The young man with the surname Chen said angrily. After so many days he still hadn't taken down the Luo Shui goddess. He was afraid that people would laugh at him. At this moment he had a stomach full of anger and needed to vent. As for other things, he needed to think about them at length. Early in the morning the capital's governor Lu Doyo came out of his wife's room and rubbed his waist. He couldn't help but sigh. Time really didn't wait for people. Without the tiger and wolf medicine, his body was becoming more and more unable to take it. These days his wife complained that she always went to his concubine's room and neglected him. She wanted to perform well last night, but she didn't expect that she would overdo it. Her body couldn't take it anymore. He looked up and saw a figure walking out of the courtyard. He hurriedly asked, "Where are you going so early in the morning?" "To the Union." The girl turned her head and said. The next moment she disappeared without a trace. The Union, what's there to cooperate with?" County Magistrate Lu complained. For the Union she went out every 2 or 3 days. Was this what a woman should do? However, this involved Her Royal Highness, and there were maids and servants around his daughter. Nothing serious would happen, so he let her go. These days, nothing major happened in the capital and he didn't have too many official affairs to deal with. County Magistrate Lu sat in the back hall, drinking tea and holding a popular novel on the market, enjoying a moment of leisure. "Your Excellency, something serious happened." Before he finished drinking a cup of tea, a person hurried in and said anxiously, "What's the hurry? What can happen?" County Magistrate Lu looked at him discontentedly. "Can there be a murder case?" Detective Zhao swallowed and said, "Your Excellency, there really is a murder case." County Magistrate Lu spat out all the tea in his mouth. Before he finished drinking a cup of tea he had to hurry out. County Magistrate Lu looked unlucky. It had been a long time since there had been a murder case in the capital. His Majesty had praised him last time for his outstanding achievements in public security in the few months he was in office. It had only been a few days and there was a murder case. Wasn't it a slap in his face? Moreover, the identity of the victim this time was really sensitive. He was the son of the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Rights, and he was inextricably linked to Marquis Chen's mansion. He had to be careful. What happened? On the way, County Magistrate Lu asked Detective Zhao. Detective Zhao immediately answered, "The victim is the son of Lord Chen's family in the Ministry of Rights." It was said that the servants in the mansion didn't see him get up for a long time, so the maid went to knock on the door but no one answered. Later, when they forced their way in, they found him dead on the bed. He died on his own bed. County Magistrate Lu frowned and asked, "What's the cause of death?" Detective Zhao replied, "There's no result from the coroner yet, but according to the servant who reported the case, it should be poisoning. It was already troublesome for a person to die, but it was the son of an official who died. It was twice as troublesome. He could have died of any reason, but it happened that he was poisoned, which made it even more difficult." County Magistrate Lu didn't have Lu Yi, so he had a headache thinking about this case. He said with some irritation, "Find out who the son of the Qin family has been in contact with these days and what he has done. Don't forget anything." Detective Zhao nodded and said, I've asked someone to ask the servants who usually follow him. Before they reached the Chen's mansion, they bumped into several constables. Why did you guys come out? Arrestor Zhao was stunned for a moment before he asked. One of them waved his hand helplessly and said, This case has just been taken over by the Ministry of Justice. Hearing that, County Magistrate Lu was stunned and said with some doubt, The Ministry of Justice has taken over. Chapter 553. The Ministry of Penalty was responsible for reviewing all kinds of laws and reviewing the criminal cases sent to the Ministry of Penalty. They rarely intervened in local cases unless it was a big case or a case was handled by imperial decree. Otherwise, with how big the Jing state was, they would be exhausted to death just by talking about the cases near the capital. The death of the son of the vice-chancellor of the Ministry of Rights was certainly a big case, but it was just a big case with limited influence. The Ministry of Penalty had no right to intervene. What was more, the Ministry of Penalty had come before he arrived. County Magistrate Lu's eyes flickered. There must be some secret deal. However, if the Ministry of Justice wanted to intervene, then let them. It was a good thing that he could extricate himself from this and avoid this trouble. Have you questioned him? How did Chen die? He didn't want to get involved in the abnormal behavior of the Ministry of Penalty. He didn't even want to enter the Chen family. He asked the constable on his way back to the county government. The bailiff immediately replied, The coroner has already examined the body and determined that it was death by poison. There was a spot on the arm that had turned blue and there was a small hole in it. From it, a very fine silver needle was extracted. As for the specific type of poison, I don't remember. According to the coroner, this type of poison is extremely rare. Even a small amount can be fatal, but it won't kill the victim immediately. The poison takes 8 to 10 hours to take effect, and once the poison spreads throughout the body, the victim will feel sleepy and die silently in their sleep. Then it's easy to solve. County Magistrate Lu shook his head and said, We just need to push back the time of his death to 8 to 10 hours to find out what he was doing and who was around him at that time. Then it'll be easy to catch the murderer. He was a little regretful at the moment. He should have acted faster and solved the case earlier, so that the Ministry of Penalty wouldn't have gotten ahead of him. Detective Zhao looked at County Magistrate Lu, scratched his head and said, Lord Lu, this case doesn't seem to be that simple. The servants of the Chen family didn't find Chen's death until this morning. Who knows whether he died last night or at dawn? County Magistrate Lu was stunned. He looked at him and said, I've handled more cases than you. I don't need you to remind me. Can't we just arrest everyone he came into contact with yesterday? Detective Zhao cursed in his heart. Why didn't you die from eating so much salt? However, an awkward smile appeared on his face as he said, Sir is wise. Who did he come into contact with yesterday? Lord Lu snorted coldly and asked. The bailiff replied, Your Excellency, Chen didn't do anything yesterday. He went to the brothel early in the morning and met up with 2 of his friends. After that he went to the brothel again. Then, he seemed to have gotten into a conflict with someone because he was drinking and flirting with a woman. He seemed to have suffered a small loss. Then he went to the brothel again, teasing a commoner girl and getting into a conflict with others? County Magistrate Lu quickly grasped the key point and asked, Who is he flirting with and where? It's that Willow Lane over there. That woman seems to be quite famous. She's the goddess of Luo River or something. She's very famous in the capital. County Magistrate Lu shook his head. It seemed that this case was not difficult. It was very likely that, as he was thinking about this, his expression suddenly froze. He raised his head abruptly and looked at the bailiff with a serious face. He asked, Who did you say just now? Luo, goddess of Luo River. When we came out just now, the Ministry of Justice had already gone to arrest her. Seeing that Lord Lu's expression was a little strange, the bailiff stuttered. County Magistrate Lu's expression changed. He immediately ordered, Prepare the horse quickly. Rui and Rui were not at home. Li Yi and Xiao Huan were too lazy to cook, so they moved the grill out. There was no sun today, so it was cool in the courtyard. They didn't ask for anyone's help. It was just the 2 of them. They busied themselves for an hour and skewered the meat and vegetables. Then, the little servant girl moved a small stool and sat beside him with her chin resting on her hand as she watched him grill the meat. Li Yi turned the skewered meat attentively. After a while Xiao Huan tugged his arm and pointed in the direction of the door. Li Yi raised his head and looked over, then sighed. In the entire capital, there were only 2 people who dared to come to one's house without a gift and even wanted to freeload a meal. It's already October. Your Kunlun purple melon is still so fresh? Li Xian ate the grilled eggplant and asked with a surprised expression. October was nothing. His eggplant was so fresh all year round. The food for 2 was not enough for 4 people. Li Yi asked Xiao Huan to get some more. Li Xian and Princess Royal were here to talk about the business cooperation between the 3 families. In fact, there was nothing much to talk about. They were just paying and waiting for the dividends. In terms of funds, Li Yi was actually not that lacking. However, the 3 heroes of the capital advanced and retreated together. If there was money, they would earn it together. If he caused trouble, the 3 of them would shoulder it together. As friends, he would feel bad if he didn't bring them along when it came to making money. The 2 of them really didn't know much about doing business. It didn't take long for them to deviate from the topic. As the future presidents of the Science Academy and the Women's Academy, they actually didn't have any ideas. How the academy would operate, what to learn and what to teach were all problems. Last time they only talked about it briefly with Princess Royal Highness. These things couldn't be explained in detail in a short time. This time they just talked about it in more detail. As for the more specific things, they needed to figure it out and decide on their own. Lordly, bad news. A slightly anxious voice suddenly sounded from the door. Li Yi looked back and saw County Magistrate Lu striding in. Fong followed behind with a puzzled expression. Lord Lu, what's the matter? Speak slowly. Li Yi didn't know what had happened to make a capital magistrate like him so flustered. He walked over and looked at him. County Magistrate Lu calmed down a little and immediately said, Lord Li, Miss Zheng was taken away by the Ministry of Justice. Li Yi glanced at County Magistrate Lu and strode out of the door. Let's talk on the way. Fong had already rushed out to prepare the carriage after County Magistrate Lu said that. Li Xian threw away the eggplant he was eating and Emmingzu came from the side. Not long after, the 3 carriages set off from the gate of the mansion and went straight to the capital. In the small courtyard, Xiao Cui walked to Zheng Zimo with a worried expression and asked, Miss, what should we do if that Qin guy comes again? Should we tell this to Li Li? No need. Zheng Zimo shook her head. Even if the other party was the son of the Minister of Rights, this was the capital. He couldn't be too presumptuous. If it weren't for the alcohol yesterday, he wouldn't have dared to do such a thing. As soon as she finished speaking, someone knocked on the door. Let me see if it's Li Li. Xiao Cui ran to the door excitedly. She quickly opened the door and saw a few fierce-looking people dressed like officials standing there. Her pretty face suddenly paled and she asked with a trembling voice, Who are you looking for? Who is Zheng Zimo? The leading official asked in a cold voice. I am. May I ask why you are looking for me? Zheng Zimo walked out and looked at these people with a slightly vigilant expression. The official glanced at her and said coldly, The young master of the Ministry of Rights was killed last night. We suspect that you are related to the case. Come with us. Qin is dead? Xiao Cui's body trembled and her face immediately turned pale. Zheng Zimo stood still. After a moment of daze, she seemed to have thought of something and her expression changed. Take him away. The leader of the bailiffs said coldly and turned around to leave. Yang Luqing walked over from a distance and waved to the people behind her. She glanced at Zheng Zimo and Xiao Cui, then at the officials and said, In that case, take me with you. Chapter 554. Who are you? The bailiff from the Ministry of Justice turned around and asked Yang Luqing coldly. Yang Luqing looked at him and said faintly, Yesterday when Mr. Qin came here I was there too. I was the one who fought with him. The officer narrowed his eyes and said, If that's the case, then take him away as well. The bailiffs behind her were holding shackles and chains in their hands. Just as they were about to step forward, Yang Luqing raised her hand to stop them. She looked at them and asked, Do you have the arrest warrant from the Ministry of Justice? One of the officers' face darkened and he said in a low voice, How dare you? How dare you question the Ministry of Justice? Yang Liuqing's voice grew colder. If you don't have it, then put away your tricks. Do you really think you can do whatever you want just because you're from the Ministry of Justice? The leading officer's eyes flashed. He didn't expect this woman to know the Ministry of Justice's procedures so well. There were countless people watching the Ministry of Justice, so he couldn't go too far. Finally, he waved his hand and said, "It's just a summons. There's no need to shackle them. Take them away." Yang Liuqing looked behind him and saw that 2 people were missing. He turned around and said to Zheng Zimo with a smile, "Don't worry, Miss Zheng. It'll be fine. Sco. That Qin is dead?" Zheng Zimo's expression was still a bit dazed. Although she didn't have a good impression of Qin, she still felt a bit complicated when she saw a living person die just like that. The main hall of the Ministry of Justice. The words "Mirror of Eminence" were hung high in the hall. More than 10 officers stood on 2 sides. As the chief judge, Assistant Minister Zhao sat in the main seat with a gloomy expression. The faces of the 2 attendants were filled with doubt. The Ministry of Justice was usually busy. Unless the emperor personally ordered it, they were usually only responsible for the review of major cases. It was extremely rare to hear a case in court like this. However, this case was different. The son of the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Rights was poisoned to death. Coincidentally, the Qin family had a close relationship with the public house of Qin. Early this morning, the public house had pressured the Ministry of Justice. Otherwise, this kind of case would have been handed over to the local government. Why would the Ministry of Justice personally take over? If one were to look deeper into the matter, the Ministry of Justice had actually stretched their hand a little too far this time. The Assistant Minister of Justice asked with a solemn face, "What's the result of the autopsy?" A white-haired old man stepped forward and said, "Sir, the deceased died of poisoning. There were bruises on his chest, but there were no fatal wounds on his body. A silver needle dipped in poison as thin as a hair was removed from his right arm. The time of death was between yesterday night and this morning. Based on this, the time of poisoning should be between yesterday afternoon and the 5th hour. My poor child, who did this to him? My lord, you must uphold justice for us." The tears on the face of a woman sitting at the side had yet to dry. At this time she could not help but cry bitterly. Assistant Minister Zhao glanced at her and said, "Madam Qin, this official can understand your feelings, but this is the main hall of the Ministry of Justice. Please be quiet and do not disturb this official's investigation." "Come, help the madam out," a middle-aged man beside the woman said in a low voice. A middle-aged man next to the woman said in a low voice. 2 maidservants immediately walked out and supported the woman as she left. "I'll leave everything to Sir Zhao," he said after taking a deep breath and clasping his hands at Assistant Minister Zhao. The reason he was able to sit here and listen today was because of the face of the Duke's public house. Otherwise, the Ministry of Justice would not give him any face as he was just a small minister-counselor. Assistant Minister Zhao nodded and slapped the gavel. Looking at the people kneeling in front of the hall, he asked, "This official asks you from yesterday afternoon to the 7th hour, where did your young master go?" A few of the servants who had been following young Master Qin heard the sound of the gavel and couldn't help but tremble. One of the servants immediately replied, "Replying to my lord, the young master was at the Spring Fragrance Pavilion yesterday. When it was about midnight, he went to the Willow Lane to find Miss Zheng. After that, he stayed at the Spring Fragrance Pavilion until evening." When these words were said, even the bailiffs at the side couldn't help but laugh. This Qin was really interesting, treating the brothel as if it was his own home. Assistant Minister Zhao furrowed his brows and said, "Bring all the relevant personnel here." A bailiff below replied, "Sir, Zheng Zimo of Willow Alley has not arrived yet, but the madam of the Spring Fragrance Pavilion and the girls who had contact with Qin have all been brought here." Just as everyone was mulling over this phrase, they saw a gorgeously dressed middle-aged woman walk in from the outside with more than a dozen coquettish women. "These people?" Assistant Minister Zhao furrowed his brows and asked, "These people are all?" The bailiff said somewhat helplessly, "Sir, these girls are the ones who had contact with Qin yesterday. Then the madam, also had contact with him." The bailiff's expression was somewhat awkward. He couldn't help but glance at the madam, his stomach rolling. The face of the middle-aged man listening at the side twitched. Assistant Minister Zhao stilled, but before he could speak, the madam knelt down with a thud and sobbed, "Sir, you have wronged me." Even if this servant had all the courage in the world, this servant would not dare to harm Qin. Moreover, Qin is one of the top financial backers of our pavilion. This servant can't wait to welcome him. How could he? Assistant Minister Zhao said coldly. This official has not asked a question. How can you shout in court? If you say another word, drag her away and give her 20 strokes of the paddle. The madam's throat seemed to be strangled and her voice came to a sudden stop. Assistant Minister Zhao looked at her and said, from the moment young Master Chen first stepped into the Spring Fragrance Pavilion yesterday, tell this official in detail everything that happened. In detail? The madam stilled and asked uncertainly. What, do you still have something you want to hide? Assistant Minister Zhao looked coldly at her and asked in a cold voice. Oh no. The brothel keeper's expression changed and she immediately said, Xianxia, quick, young Master Chen is calling you first. You go first. Lian, Hua Hua, Fei Fei, the three of you are calling him second. Hurry up and prepare. The three? Among the 2 rows of bailiffs, someone smacked his lips, an envious expression on his face. In the Ministry of Justice, the door of a certain guard room slowly opened, and a fatigued Lu Yizhang walked out. After reading through the files for another night, he still hadn't found any useful clues. At this time his head was slightly dizzy. The minister had claimed illness and was resting at home. He would probably have to wait until he returned before he could read those files that had already been sealed. In the next few days he would temporarily focus his attention on the Supreme Court. Official Lu, seeing him walk out, a person at the door immediately bowed. Sco. Lu Yizhang waved his hand and walked out. That person waved at someone nearby and said, you guys leave. At the door of the Ministry of Justice's main hall, a few people turned their heads. When they saw the 2 people walking out, their expressions were somewhat regretful. They reached out to adjust the position of something in unison and quickly followed. On the street, Lu Yizhang walked with his head lowered. Behind him, a few people were discussing something in low voices. At a certain moment he suddenly raised his head and saw a carriage driving over in front of him. A look of shock appeared on his face. Sir? In the main hall of the Ministry of Justice, the bailiffs were all flushed from hearing this. Occasionally they would secretly stretch out their hands or bend their backs slightly. In the hall, the woman was still talking incessantly. Chen is really amazing. He tormented me for almost an hour. Then he changed 4 positions and there was Guanyin. Shut up. Assistant Minister Zhao finally couldn't help but scold her angrily. He stared at the woman and moved his hand that was on the wooden block under his body for a moment. He asked, are you saying that young Master Chen once said that his right arm hurt? The woman nodded repeatedly and said, he said it, he said it. When Chen entered the room he said it, but we didn't pay attention to it at the time. Chen only took off his clothes to take a look. Then I also took off my clothes and then, for positions, shut up. Assistant Minister Zhao slammed the wooden block and said, all right, take them away first. Although this wave of questioning made him want to die, he had also obtained some useful information. Before the young Master Chen entered the brothel, he had already been poisoned, but the poison had not acted up. With the brothel women as witnesses, this information should not be false and could be used to convince the public. Moreover, the young Master Chen had no grudge against the brothel women. These people also had no motive to kill him. In this case, the murderer was someone else. Have you brought the other suspects? He asked again. Sir, they have arrived, a bailiff below replied. The eyes of the assistant minister flashed and he said, bring them up. Immediately, a few more figures walked out. Behind them were the bailiffs of the Ministry of Justice. In front of them were 3 women. One of them was tall and had a cold expression. She stood slightly at the front and the 2 behind her all had pale faces. Miss. Xiao Chui had never seen such a scene. She looked at the bailiffs with sticks in their hands and the dignified official holding Zheng Zimo's hand. Her voice trembled slightly. Seeing the 3 people standing in the middle of the hall, Assistant Minister Zhao said coldly, why don't you kneel before me? Just as Xiao Chui and Zheng Zimo were about to kneel, Yang Liuqing reached out to support them. He looked up at Assistant Minister Zhao and said, why should we kneel? Assistant Minister Zhao's eyes were slightly cold. Your Jing Kingdom. Yang Liuqing looked at him and said. After realizing that something was wrong, he stopped and said, the crime has not been determined. The Jing Kingdom does not have a law that forbids kneeling before a trial. How dare you? Assistant Minister Zhao's expression changed and he slammed the gavel down. Yang Liuqing's expression did not change. He only patted Zhang Zimo and Xiao Chui's hands to comfort them. Sir, he was the one who attacked the young master yesterday and even sent him flying with a kick. A servant of the Qin estate saw Yang Liuqing and immediately pointed him out. Are there any other witnesses? Assistant Minister Zhao no longer cared about what the woman had just said because the Jing kingdom did not have a law that forbids kneeling before a trial. It would be disadvantageous for him to pursue the matter, so he could not let her stall for time. Many people saw what happened yesterday. A bailiff nodded slightly and turned around to shout, "Bring a witness." They saw it. That young master wanted to take liberties with the young lady, but he was beaten up by that heroine. You mean that young master yesterday? He has already looked for that young lady more than 10 times, but he did not even enter the door. That heroine's martial arts are amazing. She sent several grown men flying with one kick. It was really enjoyable to watch. The crowd eating melon seeds did not hide anything and recounted what they had seen with their own eyes yesterday. Both the witness and the evidence are here. What else do you have to say? The assistant minister asked coldly. You could not stand the young master of the Qin family's harassment, so you decided to poison him to death. You had a motive to kill him and it also coincided with the time he was poisoned. What else do you have to say? At the side of the court, the middle-aged man frowned. Although he also wanted to catch the culprit, he had a feeling that the matter was not so simple. Would a mere commoner girl have the guts to poison his son to death? We did have a conflict with him yesterday, but it had nothing to do with the poisoning. The witness and evidence that Sir spoke of have nothing to do with this matter, Yang Liuqing said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. Humph, the evidence is irrefutable and you still want to deny it. It seems that if I don't let you suffer a little, you will not admit it. Assistant Minister Zhao of the Ministry of Justice snorted coldly and said, Come execute them. Xiao Chui's body trembled as she asked in a trembling voice, Miss, what is torture? Zhang Zimo's face paled. Torture was a punishment specially used on women. It was to pierce holes in a wooden stick and connect them with a string. The victim's fingers would be placed in the middle of the stick and the string would be tightened on both sides. This could easily cripple both hands. She relied on her hands to paint and play the guqin. If, thinking of this, she tightened her grip on Xiao Chui's hand. Is it too late? Yang Liuqing looked back and saw that the bailiff had already taken out the instruments of torture. He shook his head slightly and reached into his sleeve. Xiao Chui's face was pale. The moment she saw the instruments of torture, she knew what they were used for. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she still suppressed her fear and stood beside Zhang Zimo. Assistant Minister Zhao stood up from above and said, I will give you one more chance. If you still do not admit to your crimes, don't blame me for being merciless. If you want to incriminate someone, how do you admit to it? Zhang Zimo said through gritted teeth. Use torture. His expression darkened as he threw down his stick. 6 bailiffs walked towards the 3 people. Yang Liuqing sighed softly and took out a piece of silk from his sleeve. Several figures walked out from the outside in a single file. The young man walking at the front looked somewhat thin, and there was a trace of fatigue on his face. However, his voice was powerful and resonant. The Secret Intelligence Bureau is handling a case. Unauthorized personnel, please leave. The bailiff and the 2 officials from the Ministry of Justice were startled when they saw this. Even the bailiffs holding the instruments of torture did not move. Not to mention that they knew this young man, just the clothes that they were wearing were enough to intimidate people. They did not dare to make any strange movements. Lu Yi. Assistant Minister Zhao looked at him with a dark expression and squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. Chapter 555. Seeing this scene, Yang Liuqing's eyebrows twitched and he put the silk back. Zhang Zimo looked at the people who had come in, and her heart relaxed slightly. A hint of color also appeared on Xiao Chui's face. Lu Yizhi glanced at Assistant Minister Zhao and waved his hand. Take away all the people involved. The Secret Intelligence Division will officially take over this case. Wait. Assistant Minister Zhao looked at Lu Yizhi and said, This is a case of my Ministry of Justice. Isn't your Secret Intelligence Division reaching too far? The Secret Intelligence Division only listened to the orders of the Emperor and had an aloof status. It could be said to be a sharp knife hanging over the heads of the officials. They had always acted without any scruples and were not liked by the officials. If they were to take away the people today, the Ministry of Justice would lose all face. What, does official Zhao have a problem with my secret intelligence division? Lu Yizhi asked. Assistant Minister Zhao was speechless. He naturally could not speak carelessly. His expression became calm again as he looked at Lu Yizhi and asked, Then official Lu, do you have the Emperor's decree? Lu Yizhi lightly said, The Secret Intelligence Division has the responsibility of supervising the officials and handling all cases. There is no need for the Emperor's decree. But the duties of the Secret Intelligence Division do not include interfering with the cases that the Ministry of Justice is trying in court, right? Assistant Minister Zhao looked at him and said, The trial of this case is about to end. If official Lu has any objections, please speak later. Oh, it does not include? A voice came from outside the door. Yang Liuking's heart finally relaxed. Xiao Chui revealed a joyful expression and Xing Zimo also looked over. Assistant Minister Zhao looked over and was about to speak when his expression suddenly changed. He bowed and said, This lowly official greets your highness. The people in the hall and the servants of the Ministry of Justice all lowered their heads and knelt down. Emingzu waved her hand. At ease. This lowly official did not know that your highness was coming and did not go out to welcome you. Please forgive me, your highness. No matter what attitude Assistant Minister Zhao had just had, he could only temporarily put down everything at this moment. Otherwise it would be disrespectful to the princess. The minister-counselor of the Ministry of Rights of the Qin family also stood up and bowed. Emingzi looked at him and said, Today, I heard that such a serious case happened in the capital. Poisoning the relatives of court officials is a terrible thing. I have already asked my father to investigate this matter thoroughly. The Secret Intelligence Department will take over the case, and the Ministry of Justice will temporarily hand over all the files. But your highness. Assistant Minister Zhao paused upon hearing this. Emingzi looked at him and asked, What other questions do you have? Assistant Minister Zhao's expression changed. He lowered his head and said, No. Emingzi nodded and said, Hand over everything related to this case to the Intelligence Department. Li Yi looked at Xing Zimo and Xiao Huan and nodded slightly. He then said to Lu Yidong, Take them all away. Looking at the hall of the Ministry of Justice that had instantly become empty, Assistant Minister Zhao sighed. He looked at the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights and said, Brother Qin, I will not be able to help you with what happens next. It's just a pity. I'm afraid that nephew's grievances. Official Qin looked at him and asked, Although I am in the Ministry of Rights, I have heard that this Lu Yidong is known as Ghost King Lu. There is no case that he cannot solve. Thus, His Majesty holds him in high regard and promotes him. Brother Zhao, why do you say this? Assistant Minister Zhao smiled and said, The case only happened this morning and the Ministry of Justice did not delay in the slightest. We immediately started the trial, but not long after the Secret Intelligence Department arrived. Of the three people just now, one was Her Royal Highness, one was Prince Ning's son, and the other was County Uncle Li, who is deeply trusted by His Majesty. Why would the three of them appear here at the same time? Brother Qin, you don't really think that the Secret Intelligence Department is trying to solve the case, do you? Could it be? Official Chen's expression changed drastically when he heard this. What a pity. Assistant Minister Zhao shook his head and said helplessly. Could it be that they want to protect the murder of my son? The middle-aged man's expression changed again and immediately became gloomy. I'm afraid that those two women have an inextricable connection with them. Assistant Minister Zhao thought for a moment and said, If I remember correctly, the last time young Duke Qin and Royal Prince Duanyang offended Her Royal Highness, it seemed to be because of a woman surnamed Tseng. And the relationship between County Uncle Li and that woman Official Qin should know. Even if I have to give up my official position, I cannot let my son suffer injustice. The middle-aged man's expression was extremely gloomy as he said coldly, The morning court has not ended. I will go find my colleagues in the Ministry of Rights and enter the palace to seek justice for my son. Assistant Minister Zhao nodded and said righteously, The Secret Intelligence Department is becoming more and more arrogant. Now they even dare to interfere with the investigation of the Ministry of Justice. Official Qin, rest assured, I will also contact my colleagues and report them to His Majesty. Many thanks, Brother Zhao. the middle-aged man said and hurriedly left. Assistant Minister Zhao stood in the hall and watched as the middle-aged man's figure disappeared. He rubbed his chin and a mysterious smile appeared on his face. Go on, the bigger the better. Uncle Master. Yang Liuqing immediately bowed to Li Yi after walking out of the Ministry of Justice. Li Yi looked at her and asked, They didn't do anything to you, did they? Yang Liuqing smiled and said, Fortunately, Uncle Master came in time. Li Yi nodded and looked back at Xing Zumo saying, I already know what happened. Stay in the Secret Intelligence Department for now. Don't worry, nothing will happen. You. Xing Zumo's lips parted slightly and said, Be careful. Lui Chong looked at Li Yi and said with cupped hands, Official, I will take these girls back first. I fear there is something fishy about this case. I will carefully look through the records of the Ministry of Justice. Li Yi nodded and said, Get ready. I'm afraid we will have to enter the palace in a while. After the people of the Secret Intelligence Department left with Xing Zumo and the others, Li Xian looked back at him and asked with a frown, Who is framing them? It's hard to say, but there are not many people who would sacrifice the son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights and order an Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice. Li Yi thought about it and said, It's not against them, it's against me. This Assistant Minister Zhao. Mingzi thought about it and looked at him. He is usually very close to the King of Shu. Yes. Li Xian patted his head and said, The one who hates you the most is, of course, the King of Shu. Because of you, he has become the laughingstock of the entire capital. A thoughtful expression appeared on Li Yi's face. Recently, there had indeed been some strange situations around them and some evidence did point to the King of Shu. However, he still didn't think that with the intelligence that the King of Shu had displayed in the past, he could have arranged such an incident. However, there was no guarantee that he didn't have someone guiding him behind the scenes. But right now the most important thing was to get to the bottom of this case and clear their names. As for the King of Shu, after this incident, it was time to give him a big gift. Mingzi nodded and said, No matter who is behind this should be what the mastermind wants to see. Let's go to the palace. It's still early in the morning and I'm afraid that they are already prepared. Have you thought about how you are going to explain this to father? Li Yi shook his head. Everything had happened so suddenly that he could only bring the people out of the Ministry of Justice first. As for the rest, he could only take it one step at a time. In the King of Shu's manner, the King of Shu, who was slowly moving with the help of a maid, heard a servant's report. He couldn't help but widen his eyes and ask, The son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights is dead. Li Yi brought the people of the Secret Intelligence Department to rescue the criminal. Now the people of the Ministry of Rights, the Ministry of Justice, and a large group of imperial censors are preparing to enter the palace to impeach him? The servant immediately nodded and said, Your Highness, I just came back from the Ministry of Justice. The news is confirmed. The King of Shu was stunned again. Then he pushed away the maid who was supporting him and laughed, You are courting death. Men, prepare the carriage. I want to enter the palace. After saying that, he strode forward. Your Highness, your leg. The maid's expression changed and she immediately said, Thump. The King of Shu fell to the ground, hugging one of his legs. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead and he gritted his teeth and spat out a few words. Hurry. Prepare. The carriage. Chapter 556. In the Hall of Politics, today's morning court session lasted longer than usual. Although the Qi kingdom had been intimidated by Tianfa and suffered a rare defeat, as time went by, it seemed that the shadow of Tianfa had gradually dissipated. On the border there was more friction between the two countries. Other than that, the state of Zhao, which had never had any disputes with the state of Jing, was also beginning to stir. The spies hidden in the two states reported that the state of Qi and the state of Zhao had been in close contact with each other for the past few days. It was feared that they were about to make a move against the state of Jing. The strength of the Zhao kingdom was slightly weaker than that of the Jing kingdom, but it could not be underestimated. If the two countries joined forces, even if there was a sharp weapon like Tianfa, the Jing kingdom would still be in danger. In this way, among the neighboring countries except for the Wu kingdom, which was still in a deep civil war, the two most powerful countries were hostile to the Jing kingdom. Could be said that they were surrounded by enemies on both sides. Of course, the current Jing kingdom was not the same as before, especially in terms of military strength. Tianfa had been researched into many wonderful uses and it could suppress the Qi kingdom. Therefore, the Jing kingdom would not be flustered because of this. Moreover, the Qi kingdom and the Zhao kingdom were mostly testing each other. No one dared to launch a real large-scale war. Even so, the imperial court attached great importance to this and made a series of deployments on the border. General Su Dingyuan had rushed to the front line again, and at the same time he brought a large number of children of the general family with him. With the god of war and Tianfa, there was no need to worry too much in the short term. Emperor Jing looked at the courtiers below and felt satisfied. If it was a year ago, the imperial court would have been in a mess in the current situation. But today, from the courtiers to the common people, they all had confidence in their hearts. When he thought of this, he naturally thought of Li Yi. Over the past few months, although he had been lazy and did not attend to his duties, he had imperceptibly brought about such a great change to the imperial court and the Jing kingdom. Being a county earl was a little stingy. If he still behaved himself and did not cause any trouble after the establishment of the academy was completed, then his title could be promoted again. He could forget about becoming a high duke for the time being. After the founding of the nation, this title would not be given to anyone else. That kid would probably be disappointed, but it was not impossible. However, if he really waited until then, he might not be able to see that kid's days of pride. After coming back to reality, the courtiers below were still standing respectfully in the same place. Emperor Jing cleared his throat and said, "Ministers, do you have anything else to say? If there is nothing, the court will be dismissed today." After a while, no one said anything. Emperor Jing was about to announce it. Just as he was about to announce it, a eunuch walked in from the side of the hall and whispered. Emperor was stunned. He waved and said, "Emperor Jing." The courtiers were all confused. When they turned their heads, they saw several people walking in from outside the hall. Emperor Jing looked at them and said, "Ministers, what do you have to say?" Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, accuses County Earl of Chong and Li Yi of overstepping his authority and obstructing the Ministry of Justice from handling the case. Assistant Minister Zhao of the Ministry of Justice stepped forward and said in a deep voice. Chen Yunshan, Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, accuses County Earl of Chong and Li Yi of covering up the murderer who killed my son and violating the national law. Your Majesty, please investigate. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights said with a sad face and a hoarse voice. As soon as the two of them finished speaking, several more people stood up. The officials of the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Rights and several censors listed several crimes of Li Yi, the Earl of Chong, and County, vividly described the arrogance and conceit of the Secret Intelligence Department, which immediately resonated with the courtiers. In the court, the Minister of the Ministry of Rights, who had just learned of this matter, immediately stood up and said, Your Majesty, the trial has always been the business of the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Judiciary. Without Your Majesty's order, the Secret Intelligence Office dared to disturb the justice. I hope Your Majesty will punish them severely. Immediately, other imperial censors strongly condemned and protested the behavior of County Earl of Chong and Li Yi and the Secret Intelligence Office. They talked about the independence of the judiciary. The case was the business of the Ministry of Justice. Although His Majesty could assign the Ministry of Justice to handle it, he could not participate in it. Moreover, the Secret Intelligence Office openly took people from the Ministry of Justice. What was the use of the Ministry of Justice? What was the use of the law? The courtiers had long been dissatisfied with the expansion of the power of the Secret Intelligence Office. At this moment, countless people stood up. The poisoning of the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights was just a prelude. At this moment, what they wanted was to reduce the power of the Secret Intelligence Office. Emperor Jing frowned when he heard this. The Secret Intelligence Office was an institution that only belonged to him. Although he gave them a high power, he did not abuse it. As for directly taking people from the Ministry of Justice without his permission, no one dared to do so. Of course, there were always some restless people. When he gave the token of the Secret Intelligence Office to Li Yi, it was to let him act freely in the court. After all, a county was still too small. He also knew his limits. He did not really use this identity to make trouble in the capital as he said. He did not care why Li Yi directly took people from the Ministry of Justice. It would be abnormal if he did not make trouble one day. What he cared about at this moment was the case. The capital was under the feet of the emperor. In the whole Jing kingdom there was no place more stable than here. In the past there were very few murders. The son of an official of the court was poisoned to death. The impact was too bad. Where is Li Yi? Summon him to the palace. Emperor Jing said in a deep voice. I am here. As soon as he finished speaking, a figure appeared outside the hall. The courtiers, including Emperor Jing, did not expect that he was listening outside the hall when everyone was impeaching him. At this moment the atmosphere in the hall could not help but be a little awkward. Li Yi, Li Xian and Emingzu entered the hall together. The officials all had different expressions. Just now, everyone naturally mentioned the eldest princess and crown prince Li Xian, but they all unanimously pointed the spear at the county magistrate of Chong and Li Yi. No one would be stupid enough to offend the other two. After all, among the three heroes in the capital, County Magistrate Li was the easiest to bully. Did you hear what they said just now? Emperor Jing looked at him and asked. Li Yi nodded and said, I heard everything. Emperor Jing asked again, then do you have anything to say? When the courtiers heard this, their first reaction was actually worry. They were worried that he would say, I am guilty, I know I am wrong again. Then he would be too ashamed to see His Majesty and resign in advance, leaving the arithmetic school in a mess. After all, it was not the first time he had done this kind of thing. I have something to say. Li Yi cleared his throat and said, in Jingdo to murder a relative of a court official is a vile act. If the murderer is not caught, where is the dignity of the court? Where is the emperor's dignity? How can we give an explanation to the people of the capital? The Secret Intelligence Bureau receives the emperor's salary and shares the emperor's worries. In order not to delay the best time to solve the case, the Secret Intelligence Bureau sent someone to the palace to report to His Majesty and immediately went to investigate. Report to His Majesty? The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice stood up and immediately said, this is clearly sophistry. If it has been reported to His Majesty, why does His Majesty not know about it until now? Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi and thought for a moment. He looked back at Changde and asked, just now you said that the Secret Intelligence Bureau had an urgent report. Because I was discussing the war with the officials, it was delayed. What is it? Li Yi was still thinking about what reason he should use to explain this matter and was slightly startled when he heard this. A trace of doubt appeared on Changde's face. However, after all, he had followed His Majesty for decades. The next moment he stepped forward and said, Your Majesty, the Secret Intelligence Bureau said that there was a major murder case in the capital and reported to His Majesty for investigation. Since that is the case, it is not overstepping. Emperor Jing said. His voice suddenly turned gloomy. Such a serious case, I will definitely investigate it strictly. He did not expect this kind of operation. Li Yi raised his head and glanced at the old emperor. He suddenly felt that his worldview had been refreshed. He originally wanted Her Highness to give a false testimony, but now even this step was saved. Assistant Minister Zhao of the Ministry of Justice was also startled, but he did not suspect that His Majesty would lie. It seemed that impeaching the other party was somewhat impossible. He gritted his teeth and said, Your Majesty, investigating cases has always been the job of the Ministry of Justice. The Secret Intelligence Bureau is not legitimate. Your Majesty should respect the system and the ancestors. The justice cannot be messed up. Ministry of Justice? Li Yi shook his head and forced a smile at the corner of his mouth. Hee. This was originally a laugh. However, from County Uncle Li's hee, the courtiers actually heard ridicule, disdain, helplessness, sympathy, and even, go to hell. Of course, they could also understand these feelings. This was because the rate of solving cases in the Ministry of Justice was really pitifully low. Some time ago, His Majesty sent people from the Secret Intelligence Bureau to the Ministry of Justice to review the files. Who knew how many old, false, and erroneous cases had been dug out, which really made the Ministry of Justice gain a lot of face among the 6 ministries. The reason why the Minister of Justice had recently resigned due to illness was probably partly because of shame. On the other hand, the Secret Intelligence Bureau's King of Hell Lu was famous. He had repeatedly solved strange cases. Even the big shots in the court had heard of his name. Not only that, the resources controlled by the Secret Intelligence Bureau were far from what the Ministry of Justice could compare with. Things like solving a case were also a piece of cake. If His Majesty was serious, he could even investigate how many times the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice had slept with his concubine at night. From the point of view of the Secret Intelligence Bureau, County Uncle Li's hee-hee was not wrong. Assistant Minister Zhou of the Ministry of Justice, who understood the meaning behind this hee-hee, quickly blushed. If this wasn't the imperial court, he would definitely fight with this arrogant County Uncle Li for 300 rounds. Chapter 557. Your Majesty, this case cannot be handed over to the Secret Intelligence Department. When all the officials were silent, the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Rights stood up and said in a deep voice, Mr. Li has a close relationship with the woman involved in the case, and Mr. Li is a member of the Secret Intelligence Department. In order to avoid suspicion, Your Majesty, please hand the case back to the Ministry of Justice. I believe that the Ministry of Justice will give me justice. As the father of the victim in the case, he was the most qualified to speak. Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi and asked, Is it true? The Secret Intelligence Department is handling the case. I did not intervene. The Secret Intelligence Department is His Majesty's Secret Intelligence Department. Doubting the Secret Intelligence Department is doubting His Majesty. Li Yi turned his eyes and asked, Are you doubting His Majesty's justice? I dare not. The Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Rights knew that he had made a slip of the tongue, so he immediately bowed and said. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, In that case, the case will be handed over to the Supreme Court. Lu Yi will assist in the investigation. Where is the Chancellor of the Supreme Court? I am here. Among the officials, a middle-aged man immediately stood up. Li Yi frowned slightly. This case was definitely not done by Xing Zimo and the others. The reason why he saved them from the Ministry of Justice was that he was worried that they would suffer during the trial. If it was the Supreme Court, everything would be out of control. One of his shoulders was touched. Li Xian turned his head and whispered, Don't worry, Chancellor of the Supreme Court. Our people guarantee that your Miss Zheng will live more comfortably there than in the Secret Intelligence Department. The reputation of the Ministry of Justice was too bad, and the Secret Intelligence Department could not stop everyone from talking. There was no objection to handing over the case to the Supreme Court. Even the Minister of Justice and the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Rights did not speak again. Emperor Jing said to the eunuchs below, Where is Lu Yi? Let him immediately hand over the case to the Supreme Court and assist them in handling it. As soon as he finished speaking, another eunuch came in and said loudly, Your Majesty, Lord Lu Yi requests to see you. Today's court was really strange. Whoever was summoned by His Majesty arrived. The efficiency was amazing. Emperor Jing was also stunned for a moment, but then he waved his hand and said, Let him in. Greetings, Your Majesty. Lu Yi walked in and bowed. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, You heard what I said just now. I order you to assist the Supreme Court and solve this case within 3 days. Ahem, Your Majesty. Lu Yi raised his head, looked at Emperor Jing and said, Your Majesty, this case has been solved. There is no need to trouble the Supreme Court anymore. As soon as these words came out, there was a moment of silence in the court. It had only been a few hours since the incident occurred, and it had only been less than 2 hours since the Secret Intelligence Division took the suspect away from the Ministry of Justice. In such a short time the case had been solved. Was the Ghost King Lu of the Secret Intelligence Division really that terrifying? When Assistant Minister Zhao of the Ministry of Justice heard this, he also paused, a look of disbelief appearing on his face. Just now, in the main hall of the Ministry of Justice, they had already narrowed down the scope of the culprit very much and had almost locked onto the 3 women. Could it be that the Intelligence Division had directly convicted that woman? He was shocked because he knew that the Secret Intelligence Division would not do so. Who is the murderer? After Jing Di regained his senses, he immediately looked at him and asked. Lu Yi smiled and said, This matter is not urgent. Let me tell you slowly. Li Xian nudged Li Yi again and whispered, Your subordinate has taught well. He had taught him everything that should be taught. It had to be said that in some matters, Lu Yi had never let him down. Speak. At this time, Emperor Jing was also interested. Before that, Your Majesty, please take a look at the interrogation file of the Ministry of Justice this morning. Lu Yi took out a piece of paper from his sleeve and handed it to the eunuch beside him. The eunuch walked up and handed the paper to Emperor Jing. Emperor Jing looked at it for a moment and frowned. There is no witness and material evidence. How can there be conclusive evidence? I have already ordered that the Ministry of Justice and the local authorities should not use torture when handling cases. Is this how the Ministry of Justice handles cases? Many officials looked at each other. His Majesty was dissatisfied with the Ministry of Justice. Ever since Lu Yi was in charge of the old cases of the Ministry of Justice, the problems of the Ministry of Justice were exposed. According to His Majesty's temperament, after this matter he would probably take some measures against the Ministry of Justice. The expression of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice changed and he immediately said, Your Majesty, that woman despised the court and all the evidence points to those women. If we do not use torture it will be difficult to investigate the case. Haha. Lu Yi looked at him and said, Assistant Minister Zhao, remember what you said now. Assistant Minister Zhao felt very uncomfortable when he heard the word haha, but at this moment he could only swallow his anger. At this time, Lu Yi continued, This morning the son of official Qin of the Ministry of Rights died in his own home. After an examination it was concluded that he died of poisoning. After the testimony of many witnesses, it was generally confirmed that the time of Chen's poisoning was yesterday in the evening. What was Chen doing in the evening? He had just drunk some wine and went to Willow Alley to find a girl with the surname of Chen. According to the servants of the Chen family, Chen had been pestering this Miss Zeng a lot these days and wanted to take her as a concubine. However, this Miss Zeng was unwilling. Yesterday Chen was rude after drinking and had a conflict with Miss Zeng. The time when he was poisoned was around this time. Based on this, the Ministry of Justice deduced that Miss Zeng and the others were the culprits. It is not unreasonable. After Lu Yi finished speaking, he smiled again and said, However, everyone may not know that the cause of the conflict between young Duke Qin and Royal Prince Duanyang with the princess was actually this Miss Zeng. When Lu Yi said this, everyone naturally thought of the matter that caused a huge commotion last time. Because of this, many of the heirs of the families of the ministers were still lying in bed recovering from their injuries. Young Duke Qin was flirting with an innocent family in the capital and was seriously injured by a passing hero. The person he wanted to flirt with was this Miss Zeng. The reason for the conflict with the princess was because they saw Miss Zeng in Drunken Moon Pavilion and wanted to take revenge. However, they did not know that Her Royal Highness was also there at the time and suffered a great loss. After the investigation of the Secret Intelligence Division, it was found that there were indeed some unrelated people waiting by Miss Zeng's side these days. At this moment Lu Yi did not need to continue speaking. Which one of the people present was not an old fox? How could an ordinary woman have the guts to poison the son of an official and act as if nothing had happened after poisoning him? At this moment, many people could smell the scent of a conspiracy. An ordinary woman having the guts to poison the son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights was an unbelievable thing. However, after Lu Yi's reminder, everyone realized that this woman did not seem to be an ordinary woman. An ordinary woman did not have the ability to incur the hatred of these people. Moreover, based on the current situation, this woman seemed to have some relationship with the Earl of Chong and Li Yi. If the scope was expanded, the people who had enmity with the Earl of Chong, after the previous incident, Royal Prince Duanyang, young Duke Qin, and many other playboys in the capital all hated them to the bone. And the one who hated the Earl of Chong, and the most, was none other than the King of Shu, and the Ministry of Justice's investigation was so sloppy. Not to mention the Emperor, even they could not stand it. There must be something fishy going on. The younger generation of the few families, even Qin Yu, would not dare to plot to kill the son of an official and affect the dignified assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. So who could it be? It was terrifying to think about it. At this point many people did not dare to think about it anymore. There must be more to this matter. The Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights' face suddenly darkened. The pain of losing his son had indeed filled his heart with anger, but it did not mean that he had lost all his rationality. Putting himself in her shoes, How could a mere commoner woman have the guts to do such a thing? You're saying that someone deliberately framed her? At this time, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice raised his eyebrows and questioned. But at that time, other than those 3 women, there was no one else present. Could it be that someone could poison them from afar and then frame them? Lu Yi looked at him and asked, Assistant Minister Zhao, are you sure that there was no one else present at that time? Chapter 558. Besides the 3 of them, who else was there? The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice sneered and said, There were many people present yesterday. They could be summoned at any time. Lord Lu, be careful with your words. The servants of the Qin family, Emperor Jing said with a frown. His voice was not loud, but the courtiers nearby heard it. Servants of the Qin family? How is that possible? Many people asked doubtfully. Why would mere servants want to poison the young master of the Qin family? Who gave them the courage to do so? This was even more unbelievable than the woman surnamed Zeng being the murderer. Lord Lu, are you joking? This is the Golden Palace Hall. His Majesty and the other officials are watching. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice finally relaxed and said sarcastically, Lord Li once taught me that the murderer is not as stupid as we think. They often hide very well. All kinds of evidence point to the fact that the person who most resembles the murderer is often not the real murderer. Lu Yizhi turned around and cupped his hands at Li Yi. Then he turned back again and said with a smile, And those who seem to have the least motive to kill and are the least likely to be the murderer are often the most suspicious. Most people in the court only knew that there was a ghost King Lu in the Secret Service who was excellent at investigating cases. They did not expect him to say such words at this moment. Could it be that this ghost King Lu was taught by County Uncle Li? Of course, there were also a few people including Prime Minister Qin who knew that County Uncle Li Yi of Chong, and was very accomplished in interrogation. This Lu Yizhi was taught by him when he was still the County Lieutenant of Anxi. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice was stunned for a moment and said coldly, What kind of nonsense is this? Lu Yizhi's eyes gradually froze until the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice felt a little scared. Then he said coldly, Lord Zhao can doubt me, but you cannot doubt the truth. He took out another item from his sleeve and handed it to the eunuch. He said, This is the confession of the servants of the Qin family. Please give it to His Majesty. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice said quickly, His Majesty, the Secret Service must have tortured the servants of the Qin family. This testimony cannot be easily trusted. Shut up. Lu Yi suddenly turned his head and said in a cold voice, Do you think that everyone handles a case like your Ministry of Justice? Without severe punishment there is no way to try a case. Official Zhao, if you have the time to worry about the authenticity of this testimony, why don't you worry more? In a moment, how are you going to explain the origin of the 100,000 taels of silver in the secret room under your bed? You, Assistant Minister Zhao's expression changed greatly. In that instant his face paled. He pointed a trembling finger at Lu Yizhang, but he could not say another word. 100,000 taels. Hearing this number, many people in the court paled. It would be impossible for a mere assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice to save 100,000 taels of silver with his monthly salary and daily expenses. In fact, although the officials standing here looked very impressive in terms of wealth, many of them belonged to the ranks of the poor. Their monthly salary had to support the entire household, so how could they save less than 100,000 taels? At the same time, the gazes with which they looked to Lu Yi gradually became filled with fear. The terror of the Secret Intelligence Bureau was to be able to infiltrate the home of an assistant minister without anyone noticing. Perhaps his own home. Thinking of this, many people's backs became slightly wet. Your Majesty, the Secret Intelligence Bureau has long received a report that Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, accepted a large amount of bribes, practiced favoritism, foolishly judged the case, and had no regard for human life. It was only today that we found out that in a secret room under Zhao Guangyuan's bed, there were more than 100,000 taels of silver and countless jewels. Before Lu Yizhang finished speaking, Assistant Minister Zhao, who was already paralyzed on the ground, trembled and cried out, Your Majesty, this official is guilty. Someone gave this official 50,000 taels of silver this morning and told this official to investigate this case. He also said that the evidence is conclusive. When the time comes, the Ministry of Justice only needs to go to that woman's house to find the poison needle. He said that the more this case becomes, the better. The 100,000 taels of silver was placed under the bed. This official was afraid. This official did not even dare to spend a single copper coin. Your Majesty, please spare my life. The Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights looked at Assistant Minister Zhao in a daze. He could not help but take a few steps back, his face extremely pale. Jingdi's expression was gloomy as he coldly said, "Who ordered you to do this? Speak." The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice said in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, this official really does not know. The person they sent was masked. This official really does not know who it is." At this moment regarding this case, almost all the officials in the imperial court had a plan in mind. Sure enough, it was a frame-up. The person behind the scenes was really generous. He poisoned the son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights and even bribed the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice. Now he wanted to make the matter bigger. Who did he want to implicate? Everyone could not help but look at County Uncle Li. This person was really scheming. This matter was far from what those playboys could participate in. The possibility of it being Prime Minister Qin was not high. It was also impossible for it to be the Qin family. After all, the deceased was from the Qin family. Then could it be the Cui family? Prince Hui? Or could it be the others? Or... Everyone shook their heads. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice was originally the King of Shu's man. Lord Qin of the Ministry of Rights was also one of the King of Shu's supporters. If it was really him, this was too, of course, although it was hard to believe, this possibility could not be ruled out. On one side of the hall, Li Yi leaned against a pillar. Li Xian quietly leaned over and asked, "Tell me honestly, is there anyone from your secret intelligence office in my prince's mansion?" Li Yi shook his head and replied casually, "I don't know. You have to ask your Uncle Huang." Li Xian's face lit up again as he said, "The Secret Intelligence Division is very impressive. I'll go talk to Uncle Huang someday and see if he can get me a plate too. Take him away." Emperor Jing said in a deep voice, "The case of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, will be handed over to the Supreme Court. You must investigate it thoroughly." "Yes, Your Majesty." The officer of the Supreme Court immediately stood up and said. Emperor Jing looked at Lu Yizhong again and asked, "Have you found out who the mastermind is?" Lu Yizhong shook his head and said, "Your Majesty, the two servants of the Qin family only took the money to do things. They know nothing about other things." "Investigate." Emperor Jing opened his mouth again. His voice was extremely cold. After a series of orders, Emperor Jing suddenly asked, "You didn't use torture. How did you make them confess?" Lu Yizhong was stunned for a moment and said, "This method was taught to me by Lord Li. The case of Chen's poisoning is unlikely to be done by one person. The possibility of an accomplice is very high. I just locked the servants in different rooms and told them that no matter who is the main culprit or the accomplice, the first person to confess will be spared from death. If another person confesses first, the one who did not confess will be executed by 1,000 cuts." Lu Yizhong said lightly, "Then the accomplice confessed. P.S. Readers who have doubts about this can search Prisoner's Dilemma on Baidu. I will not repeat it here. This method was first proposed in 1950. Even though many of the courtiers were experts at playing mind games, when they heard Lu Yizhong say these words lightly and carefully pondered, they could not help but feel a chill from their tailbones. Although this could also be considered as an interrogation technique, it was clearly a level higher than torture. King of Hell Lu, he had almost played with people's hearts to a certain extreme. And the person who taught King of Hell Lu, everyone looked back and saw that he was talking and laughing with His Royal Highness. He did not seem to care about what happened here. Everyone thought to themselves that the person hiding behind the scenes wanting to take revenge on the other party had really chosen the wrong person this time. What he was going to suffer next was a thorough investigation by the Secret Intelligence Office and the Supreme Court. Perhaps even that person did not expect that King of Hell Lu or County Uncle Li was so terrifying that he did not give the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice time to react at all and even got himself into trouble. He did not hesitate to spend a lot of money to make this plan just to cause a little trouble for the other party. How much did that person hate him? How much could he not wait to see him in a predicament? Hurry, hurry up. At the gate of the palace, the king of Shu, who was in a light sedan chair, kept urging the servants who were carrying the sedan chair. Chapter 559. The king of Shu had just sprained his ankle a few days ago. At this moment he was supported by 2 servants and limped towards the political hall. Your Highness, please slow down. The imperial physician said that your Highness should focus on recuperation these days and avoid walking. The servant said worriedly. The king of Shu waved his hand and said righteously, why slow down? There was a murder case in the Qin family. Someone wanted to play favoritism and protect the suspect. Minister Counselor Qin is loyal to I. If I stand by and do nothing, won't I disappoint him and the other officials in the court? The servant thought that the king of Shu was just trying to hit County Uncle Li when he was down. When he heard the news, he hurried over and showed an expression of being touched by the king of Shu. Hurry up. The morning court assembly is about to end. The king of Shu tidied his clothes and was about to walk up the stairs. The morning court assembly had been delayed until very late. If it was delayed any longer, he might not be able to see some interesting scenes. At this moment, the sound of noisy footsteps could be heard from within the hall. The court assembly is ending? Seeing this, the king of Shu was startled and showed some disappointment. At the same time, hundreds of officials walked out of the hall with different expressions. Many things had happened in the morning court assembly today. The son of the minister counselor of the Ministry of Rights was poisoned to death. Assistant Minister Zhao of the Ministry of Justice took a huge amount of bribes and played favoritism. County Uncle Li was implicated. The mastermind behind the scenes had yet to be revealed, of course. The terror of the Secret Intelligence Bureau had once again refreshed the bottom line in their hearts. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice was really finished this time. Not only that, from the last few words of the Emperor, it could be speculated that this time the Ministry of Justice would usher in a major change of personnel. Lu Yi would temporarily take the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice. Among the 6 ministries, Zhao Guangyuan, who originally belonged to the King of Shu and Prime Minister Qin and was likely to become the Minister of the Ministry of Justice in the future, would face the double investigation of the Supreme Court and the Secret Intelligence Bureau. No one knew how many officials would be involved. As for the person who manipulated everything behind the scenes with the corruption of Zhao Guangyuan, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, to frame County Uncle Li and poison the son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights, although he still didn't show up and didn't leave too many traces or clues, the officials knew that except for a limited number of people, no one had the motive or ability to do such a thing. Everyone had seen the conflict between County Earl Li and the King of Shu. Of course, they were the ones who wanted to get rid of him. However, the King of Shu was less likely to be the culprit, because the Qin family was also on the King of Shu's side. In order to make trouble for Mr. Li, the King of Shu killed a young master of the Qin family and an assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Ordinary people wouldn't do such a thing that harmed others without benefiting themselves. The King of Shu shouldn't hate Mr. Li that much, right? When the courtier in front was about to walk down the steps, he was blocked by someone. The one blocking their way was the King of Shu. After a short moment of shock, an official immediately bowed and said respectfully, "Your Highness, the King of Shu." The King of Shu put away the disappointment on his face and nodded. He asked, "I heard that the son of Lord Qin of the Ministry of Rights was killed and the Secret Intelligence Office shielded the suspect. What's the result?" At this time his face was full of righteousness. He thought to himself that he had seen a lot of schemes of emperors in the past 2 days. At this moment, it was the best time to win people's hearts. The official looked up at the King of Shu with a trace of disbelief in his eyes. After a while he said in a low voice, "This case has been solved by the Secret Intelligence Office." When he finished speaking, the courtiers behind him looked at the King of Shu in a different way. Solved. The King of Shu was stunned when he heard this. More officials had already walked out from the opposite side. Prime Minister Qin didn't show any expression on his face. He looked at the King of Shu suspiciously and left directly. The Minister Counselor of the Ministry of Rights was pale and had a complicated look in his eyes. He didn't even salute. When he passed by the king of Shu, his whole body bent. When half of the courtiers passed by him, he felt the different kinds of eyes and strange expressions of the people. The king of Shu's face showed confusion. "Farrell, what's wrong?" "Thank you, your majesty." In a garden behind Lijing Hall, Li Yi bowed to Emperor Jing. "You don't have to thank me." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "You are now a county uncle. How could you be schemed against like this? Can you be a little more careful and cause less trouble for me?" Li Yi wanted to say that he was also very helpless. He didn't provoke anyone. In the last 2 times he was bullied and had to defend himself passively. The other time he couldn't control his domineering aura at will. Did the other party have to be so ruthless? Emperor Jing waved his hand and interrupted him. He said, "Do you know who is behind this matter?" "I don't know for the time being." Li Yi shook his head. Even Lu Yizhang didn't find any clues. In his heart he only had a few guesses. But those guesses were not suitable to be said on this occasion. "You are still a little reckless in this matter. I will let the Supreme Judiciary and the Secret Intelligence Department thoroughly investigate this matter." Emperor Jing looked at him and said, "I have handed the Ministry of Justice to Lu Yizhang. You also help me to keep an eye on it. One of the 6 ministries should be so corrupt. I can't escape the blame." After saying a few words, Emperor Jing sat down in the pavilion. He covered his chest and an abnormal blush appeared on his face. He said, "You go back first." Then he thought of something and said, "In the future when you play chess with Xiaoning, you are not allowed to cheat." "If I don't cheat I can't play." Li Yi sighed in his heart. The arrogant Lolita was stupid and cute in other aspects, but she was talented in chess. As a teacher, if he lost to his student, how could he save his face? He didn't know how the old emperor was born. Except for the king of Shu, his sons and daughters were all better than the other. No wonder he was so unpopular. When he walked out of the garden, Li Xian came up to him and asked him to wait for him at the palace gate. Before he reached the palace gate, he chased him from behind and waved the token in his hand as if showing off. He asked, "Can the Secret Intelligence Department enter the Ministry of Works at will and read the drawings?" Li Yi waved his hand. "The Secret Intelligence Department can't, but you can." He could even give the token of the Secret Intelligence Department's commander, so the drawings of the Ministry of Works were nothing. Li Xian put away the token and said seriously, "This time the Cui family and King Hui are the most likely culprits, and the King of Shu is also very likely. Prime Minister Qin can't let Qin Yu do whatever he wants. If you find anything you must tell me. Don't act rashly." "Don't worry." Li Yi waved his hand and said. There were many things to do next, so there was no time to waste here. Zheng Zimo and Yang Liuqing should have returned home by now. This time they must have been very shocked. He had to ask the Secret Intelligence Department to send more people to keep an eye on that place. Although no matter who was behind the scenes, they probably wouldn't make any moves in the short term. But if they could easily poison the son of the Minister of Rights, it was hard to say that they wouldn't do something even more outrageous in their madness. He went to Willow Alley first. The people from the Secret Intelligence Department had already sent them home. Wan Ruoqing had also returned. It wasn't until she saw Li Yi that the worried expression on her face disappeared. Li Yi didn't stay there for long because there were more important things to do next. The twists and turns that could affect the entire court only lasted a few hours. However, although it seemed calm on the surface, no one knew how many unseen undercurrents were surging inside. Chapter 560. Li Yi sat at the stone table in the courtyard, flipping through the files sent by the intelligence office. After reading it twice, he still found nothing. This time the person hiding in the dark was extremely cautious. He could influence the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice by himself, but he only made use of his corrupt nature and did not give himself away. He even poisoned the son of an official. Once this matter was exposed, no one would be able to bear the wrath of the emperor and the officials. Even Li Yi himself could not guess what kind of person would be so bold and daring. However, it was not important whether they could guess it or not. As for the case, they would let the Secret Intelligence Office and the Supreme Court investigate it first. According to some clues that they had found previously, the King of Shu was more likely to be the culprit. Although Li Yi still felt that the king of Shu was not intelligent enough to arrange this matter, no matter who it was, he would definitely be involved. After thinking for a moment, seeing that Mississippi Lu seemed to be going out, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Rui, come here." "What's the matter?" Mississippi Lu walked over with her sword in her arms. "Are you busy these days?" Li Yi asked casually. Mississippi Lu frowned. The heroes' conference was around the corner, so of course she was busy. She said impatiently, "What's the matter? Say it quickly." Li Yi stood up, patted her shoulder and said, "If you have anything on hand, put it aside for now. The organization has a difficult task for you to complete. Your Highness, I have sent someone to find out the truth. In today's case, someone bribed the servants of the Qin family with a large sum of money. After poisoning Qin, they framed those women and bribed Assistant Minister Zhao of the Ministry of Justice. Their purpose was to implicate the County Earl of Chong and Li Yi. Unfortunately, the intelligence office interfered in the process. They cracked the case in the imperial court and exposed the bribery of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice to His Majesty. His Majesty was furious and sent the intelligence office and the Supreme Court to investigate this matter thoroughly and punish the mastermind. In the King of Shu's mansion, a servant reported these things to the king. What a pity! The King of Shu sighed with an unconcealable disappointment on his face. Using the woman named Zheng Zimo as a breakthrough point was also something he had been asking people to do, but that group of useless people never had a chance to do it. He didn't expect someone to think the same way as him. At this moment he felt a little depressed. Why didn't he think of such a brilliant method? What was even more depressing was that even so, it still didn't cause him any substantial trouble. The Secret Intelligence Division was a busybody. Once he was promoted, he would definitely clean it up. Other than that, the King of Shu also had a lot of complaints about the person behind the scenes. After this incident, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, was probably finished. He would no longer have anyone to use in the Ministry of Justice, and his support in the Imperial Court would also decrease. Recently, everything had not been going well, and it was all because of that damned Li Yi. Your Highness, there is one more thing, but I don't know if I should say it or not. A trace of hesitation appeared on the servant's face. Why are you stuttering? Speak. The King of Shu was in a bad mood at this time, so he glanced at him and said. The servant thought for a moment and said, outside, there is a rumor that this incident was secretly ordered by your Highness. What? The King of Shu's expression changed and he suddenly stood up from his seat. What did you say? Qin Mansion. Prime Minister Qin sat on the main seat and there were many figures below. Although they were all dressed in casual clothes, if one looked carefully, they would recognize many familiar faces in the imperial court. Prime Minister Qin was a veteran of 3 dynasties, and he had a wide influence in the imperial court. Because he had always supported the King of Shu, Prime Minister Qin's faction naturally flocked to the King of Shu. He was a force that could not be ignored. Once a side was chosen in the imperial court, it could not be easily reversed. If the King of Shu was promoted, it would be of great benefit to them. At this time they would naturally help him wholeheartedly. An official looked at Prime Minister Qin helplessly and asked, Prime Minister, is this really done by your Highness? After today, many people in the imperial court would point their fingers at the King of Shu for the mastermind behind the case. If they allowed it to develop, it would be extremely disadvantageous to them. Prime Minister Qin took a sip of tea and said, His Majesty has already ordered the Supreme Court to investigate this matter. The facts will naturally come to a conclusion, so don't spread rumors. That is true, but there are already similar rumors in the imperial court and among the people. If we ignore this, I am afraid it will damage the King of Shu's reputation, the official said again. As soon as he said this, many people lowered their heads in silence. The King of Shu was the Rat King. What reputation did His Highness have now? They were already used to the fact that His Highness would do something to tarnish their reputation every few days. In the crowd, Qin Chong muttered to himself for a moment, then said, The rumors among the people must be stopped. Once found slandering a prince, they must be punished severely. Lord Qin is right. Such rumors must not be allowed to continue spreading. Qin Chong represented the Duke Qin residence. As the Minister of Rights, he had a high status in the imperial court. As soon as he said this, there were people who agreed. I am afraid we will have to ask Lord Qin of the Ministry of Rights to speak on this matter. After all, someone else said. Suddenly he asked curiously, where is Lord Qin? Another person said, after Lord Qin returned home he closed his doors and refused to see anyone. He did not come today. Hearing this, everyone's expressions changed. It was understandable that Lord Qin had lost his beloved son, but it was not normal for him to close his doors and refuse to see anyone. Could it be that he, thinking of the way Lord Qin looked at the king of Shu outside the palace today, they seemed to realize something. Lord Qin was one of them. If he was like this, what more the other officials in the imperial court? Everyone sighed silently in their hearts. Your Highness, oh your Highness, what are you doing? Are you really going to cause discord among everyone? Things have been too smooth for His Highness these past few years. Prime Minister Qin finally opened his mouth and said slowly, as His Majesty's eldest son, he is the most qualified to inherit the throne. Furthermore, we have been helping him from behind. As a result, his morals have not been cultivated and he has become arrogant and willful. This is our fault. Hearing this, everyone's expressions turned complicated. Morals have not been cultivated. For Prime Minister Qin to use such words to describe him, it was clear what kind of person he was in Prime Minister Qin's heart. If they had known that this day would come, they would not have committed such sins in the past. But now there was no turning back. Not long after, when everyone walked out of Prime Minister Qin's residence, the King of Shu looked at the returned invitation card on the table. His expression gradually darkened. Your Highness Lord Qin, scram all of you scram. Hearing the furious voice from inside the palace as well as the sounds of tables toppling and plates shattering, the two maids standing outside the door looked at each other. Their faces were pale and their bodies trembled slightly. Wansu walked on the street with his hands behind his back. Occasionally he would stop and listen to the chatter of the people on the street. If he heard something interesting he would stop for a moment and add a few words. Dressed in green, he looked like a scholar who had nothing to do. There were quite a few people dressed similarly to him in the various streets and brothels of Jingdo. Naturally, the people of Jingdo did not know that the person who had been laughing and chatting with them a moment ago, commenting on songs and listening to plays, was one of the imperial censors in the court. Because of a few words from them, a certain important figure had just been reported to the emperor this morning. Wansu was in a good mood these days. Ever since his wife joined the women's union, he could buy the latest perfume at the internal price. His meager salary could finally be used up. Recently there had been a lot of work at the Imperial Censorate. 2 days ago, an extremely bad case had occurred in the capital. The eldest son of the Minister of Rights had been killed, and the mastermind behind it had wanted to frame another important official of the court. There had not been such a bad case in the past 10 years. The Supreme Court and the Secret Intelligence Department were anxiously investigating the case. The eyes of the censors were also bright, staring at the most suspicious people, ready to go all out at any time. Of course, the identities of the people who might be involved in the case were extremely sensitive, including some princes. The censors did not dare to speak carelessly. Everything had to be based on evidence. The ancestral system cannot be abolished. The eldest son of the legitimate wife sits on the throne. Tianfa rises, his name spreads. The Jing kingdom rises, the virtuous are called kings. While he was thinking, a group of naughty children holding candied hawthorns in their hands whizzed past him. They were chattering non-stop and seemed to be singing some unknown folk song. What? The Jing kingdom rises, the virtuous are called kings. Wansu only heard the last sentence clearly. He shook his head and prepared to leave, but his footsteps suddenly stopped. He turned around and looked in the direction that the children had left. His mouth was wide open and his expression was one of shock. When he came to his senses, he immediately chased after them with large strides. Chapter 561. Who taught you the ballad you just sang? Wansu finally caught up with the children on a street in the capital city and asked eagerly. It's a big brother I don't know. Those who can sing can get a candied haw. A child waved the candied haw in his hand and said with some pride. Wansu immediately asked again, where is he now? I don't know. He left a long time ago. A child said and then scattered in all directions. The ancestral system cannot be abolished. The eldest son of the legal wife will sit on the throne. The heavenly punishment rises and his name spreads. The Jing kingdom rises and the virtuous are called kings. Wansu stood there in a daze and watched the children go far away. The sound of the ballads still lingered in his ears. Something big is going to happen. Wansu murmured a few lyrics and thought to himself. The governor of the capital city, Lu Doyo, came out of his concubine's room. He was in high spirits and his face was radiant. He felt that his luck had been pretty good recently. Everything he did was smooth sailing. Whenever trouble encountered him, it would avoid him. He was not like that idiot from the Ministry of Justice who wanted money more than his life. He was simply courting death. Since the last case, the imperial court heavily regulated the public security, and the capital city had become much more peaceful. Even small theft cases did not happen. Without any cases, he lived a comfortable life as the capital city magistrate. However, every time he thought about how his subordinate from not long ago had now become the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, 2 ranks higher than him, he would have a strange feeling in his heart. These days there were rumors about the king of Shu in the capital city. It was said that he was the mastermind behind the last case. Regarding this matter, the higher-ups had just put pressure on him to control it so that it would not affect the reputation of the king of Shu. Control my ass. How could he control it when it was someone else's mouth? He even thought that it was the king of Shu who did it. However, although he complained, he still had to do some superficial work. He arrested a few people who spread the rumors publicly and locked them up for 2 days. Naturally, the voices of the people below would be reduced. He walked to the front hall and was about to deal with a case when he saw more than 10 farmers crowded in the hall. It seemed that they were arguing endlessly about something. He frowned and said, "No noise in the court." Before he came over, he had already roughly understood the situation. A dozen or so farmers were farming in their fields when a white fox with a piece of yellow cloth in its mouth ran past them. He could actually speak the human language, scaring the farmers. Although he was scared, he still had to catch a fox that could talk. This was an auspicious sign, a great auspicious sign. If he presented it to the authorities, he might be able to get a large sum of money. Wouldn't that be better than farming? Where's the fox? County Magistrate Lu asked as he waved his hand after the crowd quieted down. "Sir, the auspicious sign is here." 2 farmers immediately carried a bamboo cage over. County Magistrate Lu took a few glances at it. It was just a fox. Although white foxes were rare, they were not auspicious. As for the fact that it could speak human language, it was completely nonsense. "Say this fox can speak. Let's hear it say something." County Magistrate Lu glanced at the crowd. A group of unruly people dared to use a fox to pretend to be an auspicious sign. If the fox couldn't speak, he would definitely beat them 10 times. What did they think the county government was? A tall and sturdy farmer smiled bitterly and said, "Sir, the fox really did speak. Many people heard it. If you don't believe me, you can ask them to come and ask. This commoner really can't command Xianxia. Oh, then tell me, what did the auspicious sign say?" County Magistrate Lu was in a good mood today. At this time he was also interested. He walked over and sat down. He picked up the teacup and asked with interest. The auspicious sign said, "What did it say?" The farmer thought for a while. What did it say about a true dragon?" He turned his head with some doubts and asked the crowd, "What did the auspicious sign say at that time?" "I can't remember it." "Seems to be a true dragon." "What should a true dragon be?" "A true dragon should be the eldest." "I remember it. A true dragon should be the eldest son." "That's the sentence." They discussed for a while and came to a conclusion. The farmer who spoke just now walked forward and handed a piece of yellow cloth to County Magistrate Lu. He said, "Sir, this piece of yellow cloth fell from the auspicious sign's mouth when it spoke. At that time the auspicious sign said, 'A true dragon should be the eldest son.'" "Make up, continue to make up." County Magistrate Lu looked at them with disdain. A piece of yellow cloth fell from the mouth when it spoke. Why didn't it drop gold? A true dragon should be the eldest son. How could they make up a sentence to fool the government? Did they really think that they were idiots? However, these farmers were illiterate, so the sentence they made up was quite smooth. A true dragon should be. What should a true dragon be? Clatter. Suddenly, as if he realized something, County Magistrate Lu's hand trembled unconsciously. The teacup fell and half a cup of hot tea splashed on his body. The tea was boiling hot, but County Magistrate Lu didn't feel it at all. He picked up the yellow cloth in his hand and looked at it carefully. On the back of it he saw a lifelike 5-clawed golden dragon. His hand couldn't help but tremble again. Come on, arrest all of them. After coming to his senses, he suddenly stood up from his seat, pointed at the dozen farmers, and said to the local government runners present. The dozen people were arrested by the local government runners before they realized what had happened. After coming to their senses, they turned pale and said loudly, Your Honor, what are you doing?" With a gloomy face he asked coldly, "Tell me who instigated you behind the scenes." Seeing the county magistrate suddenly change his face, the farmers who wanted to ask for some rewards were terrified and said hurriedly, "Your Honor, we don't want the auspicious sign or the reward." At that time many people really saw and heard it. You can ask them." County Magistrate Lu looked at him and asked, "Where are those people?" They are all in the farm," the farmer said in a trembling voice. "Let's go." County Magistrate Lu walked down from the hall without even changing his clothes. He waved to the farmer and said, "Lead the way." Are you done? While Li Yi was busy in the kitchen, the Tsundra Loli had popped her head out of the kitchen for the umpteenth time. Li Yi glanced at her and said, "What's the hurry? We still have to wait for another hour. You can play with Yongning for a while." "Yongning is playing on the slide. That's for kids. I don't want to play." "Sir, why don't we play chess?" The Tsundra Loli said excitedly, "I know how to use Dumbo, earth-drilling mouse, Tigger, and the super invincible celestial dog in the universe. Now even my father can't beat me." Without turning back, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "If you have nothing to do, go outside and see if the glutinous rice paper has dried. Remember, you are only allowed to eat 2. "Okay." The Tsundra Loli ran out like the wind. She had been drooling over the thin but sweet food for a long time. Li Yi pinched a white square object from the plate and put it in his mouth to taste. The hardness was almost the same, but the sweetness was still a little too much. However, Xiao Huan, Yongning, and the Tsundra Loli would definitely like it. For the sake of their teeth, it was better to put less sugar next time. Mississippi Lu walked in from outside and said indifferently, "Mission completed." "Is the person you found reliable?" Li Yi turned back and asked. Mississippi Lu didn't answer. She just gave him a disdainful look. Mississippi Lu was always reliable at crucial moments. Li Yi didn't ask anymore. He passed a plate over and said, "Try this." Mississippi Lu took the plate and took a small piece from it. She looked at Li Yi and put it in her mouth. "What is this?" In the next moment her beautiful eyes lit up as she looked at Li Yi. Li Yi thought about it and said, "You can call it Big White Rabbit." "What a strange name." She pouted and turned to walk outside. "Wait." Li Yi stopped her just in time. Mississippi Lu turned back. "Let's go. Leave the plate behind." Li Yi crossed his arms and looked at her. "Mississippi." Lu stared straight at him. "The plate, I don't want the plate." After a moment, Li Yi took a step back and said, "You should at least leave me 2 pieces of sugar, right?" You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.